everybody. Thomas will be here shortly. Oh, the mic is not. All right.
I can send a chat message.
Let's do it.
Yeah, there's no way they're actually going to start at 8:45. It'll take probably 5 minutes just to walk over here.
How many people is it? Like 18 people or something?
Yeah, I think so.
You want to do a mic check?
No. Feel free.
I'll do it. I just want to make sure the audio signal's coming in.
Yeah.
How do you turn it on? Just
There's a
on top
on the side.
the side.
All right, I'll be around. There might be a TDRL though.
Okay.
So.
We do. Testing, testing. Testing. Cool. Dan. There you go. Hey, Dan, can you hear me? Hey, Dan, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Dan?
Thank you.
Hey, we're streaming, by the way.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm gonna start bringing people over.
So yeah, we did a mic check, so it seems like it's fine. So what I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna sit here because I don't want to distract from whatever. I'm gonna be listening, watching the stream
Okay.
from my computer. So I'll be. But do you have my cell number?
I don't know.
Okay. So I'll leave you my cell number, and then if you have any questions. Yeah, I got it.
You got it? Okay, I'm gonna start bringing people over. Okay.
Testing. and I'm talking from the back of the room.
I love these. They're very similar. They have a It smells like a party. No, I could go there. I could go there. You don't want to. Right here. We're all so curious. We're all so so nice about it. It's like,
Yeah. He went to a coffee shop and saw two people back to chair. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're like, or I did Christmas like a bar school that you can't spot me like doing and I have no back. Like why? Yeah.
Sky. Hey, testing. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Does it sound like it's coming through a mic?
Yep.
Okay, good, cool. Okay, so welcome to Las Vegas. I hope everyone made it in okay. We're super happy that you're all here today. You know, today is really all about you, right? Like you're approaching the end of your projects, and you know, this is a time for you to share out as you're kind of heading toward that finish line. This event is live streamed and it will be recorded. So yeah, do with that what you will. Sometimes that motivates people, sometimes it terrifies them, you know. Hopefully you're on the other side of that. So anyway, this is our Cohort 1 Summative Forum for Collections as Data, Part the Whole. Just some kind of like housekeeping, you know, this is the general agenda. It has been shared with you already. We will be having meals and breaks back across the atrium in the Amargosa room. That's what that room is called. I call it the rhombus room because it's kind of shaped and it's like really kind of looks like a rhombus room. Let's see, what else? Bathrooms. So bathrooms are right out here to the left. There are gender neutral restrooms on the second floor, basic roughly in that direction. So you go up and then over in that direction. Let's see, water is allowed in here for today. Coffee is allowed in here. I think that's mostly it, housekeeping wise. Am I missing anything, Hannah, Stewart? Okay, yeah, so there will be food, there are bathrooms. This is the agenda. There's power from the ceiling if you want to pull those things down. Yeah, so I think that's probably it with that. Moving forward, you know, thank you to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Project would not be possible without them. The team, it's me, it's Hannah Skates-Kettler, it's Stuart Varner, all seated in the back currently. And also we have a new addition to our team. We have Yasmin. Yasmin, if you could raise your hand. Yay, Yasmin, welcome. So Yasmin was co-PI on supporting OA collections in the open. She co-founded the DLF's Technology Surveillance Working Group and served as the past chair of ACRL's Research and Scholarly Environment Committee. So we're super excited that she was able to join the team. I think she really brings like a set of experiences that will be really valuable to us as we move forward. So thank you, Yasmin, for joining. That also leads us to congratulating our friend Lori Allen right there. Recently joined the Library of Congress. We're super happy for her. She was sort of fundamental to the Collections as Data project, you know, our Mellon project, also the IMLS project before it. And she is continuing work in this vein at the Library of Congress through, among other things, computing cultural heritage in the cloud. So I'd be on the lookout for that. They're doing a lot of public webinars. I think they're seeking to hire people. So a great project to pay attention to. A thank you to our advisory board. I know that some of you met with them, I think, fairly early on in your projects. You know, thank you to them for support of the cohort. I was like very bright all of a sudden. Thanks, Keith. Just, you know, for our audience, you know, the purpose of this project is to support the development of broadly viable models that support implementation and use of collections as data. Just a quick shout out to some of the sort of fundamental principles. This is all just pulling from the CFP, that, you know, in our support of the development of these models, that we wanted to support ethically grounded creation of machine actionable collections, computational use by specific communities, that hopefully the models demonstrate capacity to serve underrepresented communities. We discourage contingent or temporary labor in the projects that we're supporting. We have an emphasis on local sustainability and ready potential for adaptability by other institutions. Collections of data part to whole. We're re-granting $600,000 to 12 projects across 2 cohorts. This is the first cohort. Cohorts are tasked with creating a use model, an implementation model, and a new collection as data. This is the cohort: Carnegie Museum of Art, UNC Chapel Hill, Northwestern University, University of Pittsburgh, University of Denver, and Weeksville. Projects will wrap up in April 2020, which is not that far away, right? It's like pretty close. How did that happen? So we thought, as you're reaching the end of your projects, the forum would be a really good opportunity to reflect as you're kind of heading toward the finish line for your projects. Specifically, we've asked each team to speak to challenges and successes in the context of their projects, deliverables that they're planning to release, things like models, partnership agreements, workflow, code, data, and so forth, and any planned activities post-grant funding. Why did I include this? Okay, it was because we feel so lucky to be able to, as a team, to be able to work with you all. We have been learning a lot from you. I have a phone. Okay, so we have been learning a lot from you. We look forward to continuing to learn from you, and hopefully you're learning a lot from each other too. And we're hoping that pays sort of dividends for our cultural heritage communities. And with that, I think I'll transition to team presentations. Okay, so the first team could come up. We'll shift over into team presentations. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. I'll leave it here. You can do this. This is tiny.
So Thomas, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
What is being live streamed? Are
Your presentation.
videos or just the screen and sound, or?
Yeah, so the what is being live streamed is the sound, and then a recording of you giving the presentation. And this is in screen, but the primary thing we're focusing in is on the presenter. Yeah.
Oh, I see. There it goes. Okay, are we good to get started? Okay. So good morning. Ooh, my coffee's over there. Okay. Yeah, that's not gonna work. All right. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. So my name is Dominique Luster. I'm with the Carnegie Museum of Art team. I'm here with my colleagues Ed Motznick, Sam Tickner, and then our other colleague, our disciplinary scholar, Charlene Fogy-Barnett, is at the museum opening our brand new exhibition, which we'll talk about in a second. So she apologizes that she can't be here, but like stuff has to go up on walls and somebody needs to make sure that that happens. So want to talk about what we've done as a part, thus far as a part of our collections as data, show you a little bit about the deliverables that we've created and what we're doing moving forward. We have a lot of activity happening this month. So is it gonna go? Tech error. Does not want to advance. Nothing wants to advance. There we go. Okay. I think I just wanted to start again. Yes. Okay, so just for those whom we didn't get to meet in May, just a quick overview. We're representing the Teenie Harris collection, specifically at Carnegie Museum of Art, which is the most wonderful photography collection I've ever seen in my life, which may be a little biased, but that's genuinely how I feel. I think Teenie Harris was one of the greatest photographers we've ever had. He lived from 1908 to 1998, and he's predominantly going to photograph everyday African-American life in Pittsburgh from about 1935 to 1975. And he's working for the Pittsburgh Courier. So a lot of the collection, which is approximately 80,000 black and white negatives, is going to come from that corpus of material. And then additionally, there are a few 15,000 or so completely uncategorized and undigitized color materials, few prints, and then a little bit of manuscript material that had just been collected over time. And then the Teenie Harris Archive, which was established at the Carnegie Museum of Art in 2001, has additionally incorporated a few hundred hours of oral histories. So because the collection came to the museum completely unidentified, we received 80,000 black and white negatives with not a single name, date, location, nothing. That served as kind of the primary genus, I guess, of our project, because we need names, dates, but how do we do that in ways that are responsible? And the way that we had been doing identification up until this point is through our oral history program. So our colleague, Charlene Foki-Barnett, is the person who manages the oral history program. She brings people in from the community that she knows personally, and she sits down for hours with them, and they have a very specific first-person narrative process that we've developed over time, where we work through with individuals to try and identify as many people as possible through the photographs. And so that's how she had collected that 150 hours of oral histories, which serves as kind of the baseline of the identifications that you'll see that we do. So the primary job of the archive is, one, the physical and digital preservation of the materials. As I mentioned, our main job is to add names, dates, and stories back into the collection. We do that through a lot of community collaboration and exhibitions. So we collect a lot of information, we put on exhibitions, and then through those exhibitions, someone's walking through the gallery and says, oh, that's my grandfather, and then we collect more information. So our project had two services. One is to create a cleaned, normalized, and decolonized collections data. So we use a Axial product called KE-EMU as our primary collections database. And in EMU, every single one of the 80,000 photographs has been item level cataloged. So that can be with or without names, dates. We've cataloged everything. But thankfully, through the generous support, when we were cataloging, there were an assortment of interns, of technicians, of archivists over the course of about 7 years, all working on the project. So that data is extremely dirty and difficult to work with. The second service second need that we identified was to create and utilize in-gallery interactives to kind of engage with the community in new and innovative ways, to help them contribute into the collection and into building that narrative base more collaboratively as an archive working with the community. So, well, the first service that we built, the first product tool that we built, that really Sam built, is a tool that looks at our titles. So this was the model that was adopted back in 2001 when the collection was originally acquired, that the archivist and the curator at the time decided that they weren't quite sure how to create archival titles, first of all, and they also weren't quite sure how to create archival titles that were racially and culturally competent. So they just simply described every single thing that they saw. So that could have included everything from the patterned floor to the carpet to anything, the ferns in the background, anything that you could see would be described, such as like woman with leg posed on right next to man on car with blue. Like, I mean, it really just got like out of control. So the tool, and so we have about 80,000 of those records that are out of control. So the way that we try to move forward is identifying these key elements here, abbreviated, so titles, and abbreviating them. The Library of Congress approved subject headings, which meant taking all of the subject headings out of Library of Congress and identifying which ones were appropriate and which ones were not, as we're all familiar with the Library of Congress. Listing out names. Before, everything in KE-EMU is free text, so it was very difficult to just pull basic names. Location data, so things may be in the Hill District of Pittsburgh or in Homewood of Pittsburgh or not even in Pittsburgh, and we really wanted to narrow that down. As I mentioned, Tina Harris worked for the Pittsburgh Courier, so there are some Courier articles that have been reattached to their original photograph, and then finally, keywords. So, drum roll. This is what, through a lot of back and forth, this is the beautiful product that Sam was able to create. This is the interface of what it looks like from the archivist standpoint, and as you can see, it's an output. So we take KE Emo, export the entire collection as one fell swoop out of EMU, import it into this tool, and it generates a lot of suggested options for the archivist to review. So you'll see here that it automatically categorizes out a lot of the EMU entry points or data entry things that we've told it are important. And then what it does is this, does it play? Nope. Nope. Okay. So that video is not working. But essentially, as it scrolls down, as you scroll down here, you would be able to go into the descriptive text field and free type in things. You would be able to open up the subjects field and select which, as the archivist, you could use your own like human training to select which subject headings, keywords, names are important to include, should be removed. You can decide how they should be ordered, so you can just drag and drop them into new positions. What else am I forgetting? It can do a lot. Is that a good? Okay. Sorry, it's not videoing. So that was our first service. It was completed, I think, or at least 85%, 90% completed, probably in August, September. And then as we're approaching an exhibition, the team moved our direction to our in-gallery interactive, which was service 2. We ended up actually taking 2 shots at the app. This is what the first iteration looked like. It was basically a digital storytelling platform that was going to be installed in the galleries, and it was going to include a lot of information around text that we have, Courier articles that we have, oral histories, and it was going to look a little bit like parsing a story together. So you could have a photograph and then open a map about that space. It included information about Salud. It would include oral histories about the photo of the person. It was a really, really beautiful storytelling app. However, we decided that it wasn't necessarily fulfilling a deeper need. And so we looked back at, oh wait, let's see if this one works. Okay, so none of the videos are working. That might be a problem, Sam. It's okay, we're gonna keep going. So we decided to go back to the drawing board and better understand after the Penn visit is when, during that presentation with Sharon, we really kind of talked more intrinsically about who is our audience. And so during that Penn visit, we decided that these were our audiences, our primary, secondary, and third level audience. So if you were at the meeting back in May, you may remember that activity. But this is the main part that we took away from those 2 days, was really understanding who our audience was, genuinely and honestly, and what did they want. And the reality is that our audience is the African-American community in Pittsburgh, and they want to be able to find people. They want to be able to find their mother's wedding photo or their grandmother's high school graduation photo. They want to be able to find people better, faster, easier, and they don't have MLIS degrees to help them navigate a very complicated, like super integrated system. They need a very streamlined way that is efficient. So that's what we created. We took a lot of kind of like my work as the archivist and just understanding how information systems work. Charlene's work as the main community outreach person, and she's the person that's actually working with all the communities, doing all the outreach. She understands how people are searching because she's the one that's talking to them and understanding how they're looking and what they're looking for. And when we combine that with Sam's more just like tech brilliant brain, and we kind of shoved it all together, and we're gonna shove it into a brand new Teen Harris gallery. And not only are we creating this in-gallery interactive for searching, but now we actually have a home for the community to actually go and be with the archival collection, which has never happened before. It's a new idea of having a whole museum gallery, collections gallery space dedicated to an archival collection. And we're really excited about that. But just for reference, here is going to be 2 iPads where the search app is what we're calling it, but Service 2 from this grant will be installed permanently in that gallery. This is just another view of what it looks like inside. It really does look exactly like this. It's kind of cool. So the app that ended up being built, this is the wireframing for it. This is kind of what it looks like on the most basic end. This is what it looks like as of last night, right? As of this morning, last night. So it's a really cool search app where, one, you can search for what exactly you're looking for. Like your grandmother's name is Mary Sue, so you can type in Mary Sue. But we've also populated it with a few recommended suggestions. If you're just searching the archive, provisionally, as the archivist, I think we kind of came up with 30 categories that are commonly searched. But what's really cool about this is that it's powered by Algolia, which I wasn't familiar with. It's something that Sam was able to find. And it is the ability for it to search better. You can teach it things, right? Or not teach it things, but you can tell it like this list are women's groups, and it can help kind of filter that out so that people get better results. It's really about helping people find the results that they're looking for easier, faster, cleaner, better. And then we're also loading it with analytics. I'll play this in a second. But the other thing is that we're going to load it with a lot of analytics because we want to know what are people searching, what words are they searching, how are they searching, are they successfully coming to the search that they're looking for? If not, why? How can we improve? So I'm going to play this just so that you can see how it works. Okay. Is it working? It's not. We may have an internet fail. Okay. Let's try another one. There's a few in here. So this is what it'll look like as you search. You were to search weddings and you're scrolling through. Gives you weddings. You can sort by date. We went back and forth about what the sort and filtering could or should be. We've decided for now, we just want to be able to sort by date. Just keeping the user in mind, like everything really needs to go back to the user. Like if you include a lot of really complicated sorting and searching filters, you can bog down the user's, in my opinion, you can bog down the user's experience. So date it is. So Charlene isn't here, so she has no idea that this is happening, but you can sort and find 1-year-old photographs of our colleague, but just, well, she's probably watching it. This is like being live streamed. So there's that. It's a really brilliant thing, and it'll be on 2 iPads in the gallery, and they'll be there forever. She is very. So we've also incorporated the ability, if you do find photographs that you enjoy, you can share them to yourself, and you get an email from the archive. Oops. I'll just go to this one. So you can email photographs to yourself, which is really great. And then it'll look like this. Thank you for your interest in the archive. Here's the photo that you requested. There's also the ability for the community to just give us information. And obviously it's still being developed, but that's kind of how that works. And then finally, just as I'm wrapping up, because I think I'm a little close to time, we did have the really cool opportunity to partner with Carnegie Mellon University's Studio for Creative Inquiry, led by Golan Levin. And his team was using a very similar, the exact same data set, and we were looking at textual analysis. They were looking at visual analysis. And we put our brains together to come up with a bonus project. which also looks like it's having trouble loading onto the internet. Great. Well, I'll explain it to you. Basically, it's an 85-inch touchscreen that has the entire photographic archive loaded onto it. And it's in like 16 by 16 pixels that float on this touchscreen. And when you touch it, the image can blow up, as you see here. And then if you select this image as Charlene is demonstrating, it would give you options to sort the entire collection by age, by year, by head count, by visual similarity, by luminosity. It's and a couple of other things, but it's a really beautiful program. So that, let's say you find this photo and you'd like to see all the other women's groups photos, you can then just hit sort by similarity, and the computer will give you basically in a constellation all of the women's group photos. Or if you say like, here's a parade, you click on the parade photo and you sort by similarity, and it gives you all the parades, it gives you all the car crashes, like whatever you click and you sort by, it'll give you those things. If you were to click on a baby and then sort by age, or actually you don't have to click on anything, you can sort by age and it'll put all the babies at the top and all the centenarians at the bottom. You can sort by luminosity, you can sort by head count, so that it would put all of the studio portraits or landscapes at the top, and then it puts all of the like larger group portraits and group photos or large crowd scenes at the bottom. It's a really beautiful piece of work. The great thing is that these two projects were coming in their journey at about the same time and at the same pace, so that Sam was able to utilize a lot of their work. He was able to utilize a little bit of Sam's work. Like the cross collaboration was really cool. And last but not least, I wanted to just add this because it wasn't necessarily in our plan, but we have gotten a few really cool opportunities of like unexpected interest from our project. So last week, I went and presented on this project at the Getty Research Institute. They have a project going on where they're looking at computer vision in the future of art history. So they wanted to better understand what we were doing and kind of take it as a model for what they're looking to do with the Johnson Publishing Archive. So that was a really cool and unexpected opportunity. And then tonight I leave for Arizona because the Center for Creative Photography has also expressed some interest, and just people are just interested in learning what we're doing. It's fairly rare to put an archive in a whole art gallery. So, and just the way that we work with community to do identification, and now, you know, keeping a blend between human-based interaction that's utilizing in computation is just different. So it's been really interesting, the response that we've gotten from the rest of the photography and archival community of, hey, no one's really done this before. Can you come talk to us about what you're doing? Which is cool because I didn't think anybody would notice. So it's a really cool project. All of our slides just got all kind of funky. It's okay. But this is a slide that just says if you have any questions, and apologize for the technical errors, but if you have any questions, I think I have a few minutes. So thank you. That's what it's supposed to look like. No questions? That's weird. Oh, sure. Yes.
Have you or can you publish the code for that first service?
Yes, I sincerely apologize.
And since we only have a mic at the podium, can you
Repeat the question? Absolutely. So the question was, because it's being streamed, right? Absolutely. So the question was if any of the code will be published. The answer is yes, absolutely. 2 points on that. One, ours will be open. Everything we've done is open source, and we were able to get an open source license from Algolia. I don't think it's naturally open source, right?
It's not.
It's not. Okay.
It's really easy to apply.
Yeah, I think we did it in what, 2 days, 3 days? I don't know. But that was cool. So that'll be open sourced. And then also the Studio for Creative Inquiries project is also open source. And that's actually how Sam was able to use it in the first place. So yes, all the code will be published. Cool.
I have a question. Can you talk about how the similarity feature works?
Sure. Well, I can explain it from as much as I understand. But this, just to repeat the question, how does the similarity feature work? And you're specifically, I'm assuming, referring to the project at CMU, not our search grant or our.
Yeah.
So those are two different applications. But the similarity works in the fact of visual similarity and acuity. So you just simply, you basically, from the way I understand it, Golan and his team were able to completely like deconstruct and pixelate the entire collection and then find visual acuity and similarity through a couple of different programs. I'm not familiar with exactly what those programs are called. Do you know what they used? I don't know what they used, but their code will be published. So their project is, I believe it's NEH, so it definitely will be published and it'll be open source. But that's also what the Getty is doing as well. And actually the developers new goal, like the Golan team and Getty's team used to be the same team. It's basically like the 5 people in the world who do this work. Yes.
Dominique, I think that you mentioned that in the app, there is a way for users to contribute information. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So they can contribute information by saying, like, I think this is my grandfather. Now that information comes to me as the archivist, and then I can look at the photo that they're suggesting and look at the information that they've provided and cross-reference it, either through maybe an obituary or another photograph that we have in the collection or in someone else's collection. But yes. So they can email in they can click on a photo and say, this is my grandfather. And then I have to vet all that information. It won't just automatically change the data, if that's the question. Like someone couldn't be in the gallery and say, this is my father, and then it automatically changes in email. We wouldn't do that. Yes. Oh, wait, did you have a question? No? Maybe you were just scratching your head.
Oh, well, I actually do have a question, so thank you.
Sure.
So, I was kind of interested in the way that people are going to use this for genealogy in terms of like Ancestry.com. Because on that website, people could say, well, this is my father, and upload it's like a family tree.
Yes.
I'm kind of wondering, so people can download the images and save them to that format, or have you thought much about how that relationship?
So people can email the images to themselves. They can't download straight in the app from the gallery, but they can email the photo to themselves, and I guess you could just like right click on the photo and download it that way. But I could see it being a complementary source to the genealogy world, but I can't see it, like we wouldn't be able to link directly into Ancestry. And Ancestry wouldn't necessarily link to the archive, I don't think, but that's a good question. I would throw that to Charlene, because she's actually a professional genealogist, so that's a good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
How did you inform the public that this project was going on? How did it engage with you in the development of this? How did Charlene go about doing what she does?
So Charlene is really just like the world's miracle maker. Just want to put that on the official record, let it be carved in stone. She's literally the greatest human. So she also just has this ability, she just knows everybody. So our approach as the archive as a whole, not just for this project, but our outreach process as a whole is just to be as present in the community on an everyday capacity as possible. So we go to community events, we go to senior citizen community houses, we go to the YMCA programs, we go to the local Hill District Elementary School career day. Like we literally go, we have like a little cart that we tow with us with some prints. We try to be as active members of the African American community, or really just the Pittsburgh community, as humanly possible, just in general. So with that, it's a lot easier to talk to people about this particular project because we were there anyway. So we're already going to Ebenezer Baptist Church 100th year anniversary. Like we were already going to be there. So while you're there, it's a little easier to talk to people about what's going on and get their interest or feedback on, because we want to make sure that if we're going to install this app in the galleries, like, does it make sense? Is it actually going to work the way that is digitally native for our audience that's using it? Meaning, our audience is one, a certain threshold at or under the digital divide, and a lot of the individuals in our community may only have a mobile phone in which they're receiving internet. And then also, we just want to make sure that the way that people naturally use searches, that we're doing it in service of them, and we're talking to them and really being like, okay, should we do this? Does this make sense? Does this not make sense? Like, no one's going to search that way. Sam had a really good idea of like, we need to provide it with synonyms because we know the kinds of words that people are searching, and we need the computer to know, like, when someone searches AKA, they mean Alpha Kappa Alpha, which is a women's organization. So put that result to the top, which is like one of the last things we need to do. But that's the kind of like, we just need to know how people search so that they actually get the results that they're looking for efficiently, effectively, better, faster. So I hope that answers there's no straight way to answer your question because we kind of we just kind of incorporated into the things that we were already talking about. So we're like out there. I don't want to go over my time, but I'm happy to answer a couple last questions. Okay, well, we're around, so thank you very much. 9:33, I feel like I did good. Oh, wait. I want to make like a loud scratchy noise on the mic for those who are streaming.
Thank you. Like, I don't know how you guys want to do this. We're just gonna like pass the lapel, or if you're gonna reattach it. Yeah. Should be good.
It's coming through, actually. People are gonna ask questions out there. Yeah, you could probably get there. Sure. But it's picking up people asking questions all the way to the past. Pizza right now.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, of course.
We ready? Okay, great. So in 1950, Paula Murray published this book titled States Law on Race and Color. So Paula Murray, in case you don't know, just a little bio, she was this incredible woman. She was born in 1910 in Baltimore, Maryland, but we claim her family goes way back in the Triangle area, Durham and Orange County, California. She could trace her family several generations back, well into slavery. She's this brilliant woman who was a prodigy. In 1940, she was arrested for sitting in the colored section of a bus 15 years before Rosa Parks. She graduated from Hunter College. She earned a master's degree from UC Berkeley, and she later earned a law degree from Howard University, where she graduated first in her class. She didn't go to Howard University because she was denied entry to UNC Chapel Hill Law School because of her race. She also later became the first Black woman ordained as an Episcopal priest. So this book, published in 1950, States Law on Race and Color, was called The Bible of the Civil Rights Movement by Thurgood Marshall. And the book was a collection of race-based laws, not just laws that were discriminatory laws, but also laws that were actually civil rights laws that gave people rights in spite of their race. So laws that worked on both sides of the color line. Explaining the purpose of the book, Paula Murray called it a convenient reference guide for attorneys, and also, and I quote, a method of determining the extent to which racial practices were controlled by law throughout the country. She wanted to show how impractical and how extensive these laws were in American society. So many people, when they think of Jim Crow, often think of the water fountains or the back of the bus. It's like the two images that pop in people's heads. But Jim Crow was really so much more than that. It was totalizing. It was a system of racial apartheid designed to create this racial hierarchy in the South. So it was not only separate schools, it was social mores, it was courtesy titles, it was cemeteries, it was dignity, it was opportunity, it was possibility, it was respect, and it was the way that these little black girls felt when they're staring through a fence, watching white girls play on a playground that they know they can't go play on. That's what Jim Crow was. It was not just about the segregation ordinances, but that's sort of what Paula Murray's point was. To gather all these laws to show just how pervasive Jim Crow actually was, to show just how inconvenient all of these laws actually were, not only for individuals, but local jurisdictions. So she was correct that their scope was just incredible. She understood this, but as she also knew, the scope limited her ability to complete her actual task. She knew there were many holes that she could not possibly publish all of the Jim Crow laws. So we have over 286,000 North Carolina laws, roughly about 3% of which are Jim Crow laws. She could not possibly categorize or catalog all of those laws for North Carolina, let alone the entire country, as she was setting out to do. In 2019 and 2020, we can do that. That's what we're doing, completing the work started by Paula Murray in the 1940s. You'll hear more about that for the people who actually do that part of the work. I'm just the historian. But these laws, when they are compiled and distributed, they will be used in a number of different ways. One is teaching. We can only imagine how teachers will use this, but to obviously understand what happened with Jim Crow, what the history of race in the American South looked like. In the American South today, we are undergoing nothing shy of a total reckoning of our history. Our campus has been engulfed in that in the last several years, and people are learning how to better teach the history of race in this country, and especially in that region. And these laws are going to help people do that. Yesterday, I had a classroom, and one of the things that they do is they add so much depth to how you can teach Jim Crow. I had a class, I had them read a Richard Wright story, I had them read oral histories from people who lived throughout Jim Crow, and I had them look at Jim Crow laws. And it just adds so much more depth and texture to the way that you can understand what this society actually was. And teaching, this will be used in K through 12 classrooms, college classrooms, graduate seminars, so on and so forth. Research, there's never been anything like this. There are lists of Jim Crow laws from different states. I don't actually know where many of them come from. There are different websites, but no one has ever done anything like this before. No list of Jim Crow laws has ever been produced for an actual state. So that has implications for historians, policymakers, legal scholars. We're going to help equip people to better understand exactly what Jim Crow was, how it operated, and what are the implications for the laws as they work today. This will also provide a model for other states. So other states, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, et cetera, can do something similar using the methodology that we're using here. But not only for Jim Crow laws, not only for racial laws, but people interested in laws that affected gender or laws that affected housing or healthcare or different things like that. And then like Paula Murray, there are things that we can only really guess at. There are going to be many unanticipated ways that people can use these laws. One way that I've encountered that I think is really quite profound came to me in the form of an email a few months ago. I got an email from an attorney in Durham, North Carolina, who was representing a woman who was being charged with voter fraud. Because of the way that accusations of voter fraud, especially since 2016, have been thrown around in our country, it has incentivized especially conservative prosecutors to go out and find these cases of voter fraud. So there's this woman in Durham, North Carolina, who is being prosecuted for voting as a former felon in the 2016 election. And the statute that goes back to outlaw her voting is a Jim Crow law in 1901. So he wanted an expert on Jim Crow to better understand exactly not only what that law was doing, but what other laws surrounded that sort of laws. What other Jim Crow laws can he then use to help put in context to defend this woman as she faces jail time for voting as a former convicted felon in 2016? And these cases are popping up all over the state of North Carolina. It looks like there's going to be some sort of collective action. But in using Jim Crow laws, but to better understand how this original law worked, we are now able to help people like him fight to keep his client out of prison. And I think that's pretty incredible. So we'll see exactly how people are able to use this, but by better understanding Jim Crow laws, we want to help empower teachers, researchers, and then people who also want to help sort of fight these legal systems of oppression, even as they're working in 2019, 2020, and in the future. Turn it over.
Thank you, William. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria Estorino. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Special Collections at UNC Chapel Hill and Director of Wilson Library. If you've been on that campus, that's the building where the Special Collections live. Well, I guess I should move slides. So I want to talk now specifically about the project and really its background and where we are in our thinking about it right now. So the project came to be through a combination of several events and initiatives. And I'm going to talk about just two of them in particular. One is the creation of a Special Collections Digital Scholarship Working Group that I convened in 2018 with the goal of encouraging collaboration between the Special Collections and the digital research services. At UNC Chapel Hill, the Special Collections is large. We operate out of a dedicated library, and our staff is about 60 full-time employees just within the Special Collections. The Digital Research Services team is based in our main library, Davis Library, and it includes 7 specialists in data visualization, GIS, and data creation and analysis. So this team is wonderfully led by Amanda Henley, who will be speaking after me, and is the project lead on the books project. So the working group has focused on a few very just like low threshold kind of goals. Really, one, developing closer working relationships, creating shared learning opportunities, and investigating possible collaborations across the units. For the Special Collections in particular, it has also been a space to deepen our understanding and our knowledge of what digital scholarship is and its methods, how researchers are applying them using our materials, and how such applications might impact our policies, our practices, our workflows. The other event or initiative that I want to point to is that at the libraries, I think Stuart, when Stuart was at the library, we were members of the IMLS funded project Digging Deeper, Reaching Further, Libraries Empowering Users to Mine the HathiTrust Digital Library Resources, which essentially provided training for librarians. And it was had multiple iterations. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. I should lift this up. And so the UNC library staff benefited from that particular instruction, and many of our staff were introduced, particularly to text analysis, at one of the 4 day-long workshops that were held locally between 2016 and 2018. So one of the people who participated in one of those trainings is Sarah Carrier, who is a research and instruction librarian in the Special Collections. Sarah is also a member of the working group that I mentioned before, and she attended one of the text analysis workshops that was provided for library staff. As the subject specialist for North Carolina, Sarah collaborates closely with a program called Carolina K-12, which provides free continuing education trainings for K-12 teachers in the state. At one of those trainings, Sarah received a question from a teacher who was looking for a comprehensive list of the Jim Crow laws in North Carolina. So her interest had been piqued as to whether text analysis could be used to identify Jim Crow laws. And Sarah and Nathan Kelber, who was the first project lead and our former digital scholarship librarian, brought the question to the Digital Scholarship Working Group, where we incubated the proposal for this project that resulted in our Cohort 1 award. Oops, wrong keyboard. Yeah, okay. So on the books is Collections is Data project to make North Carolina legal history accessible to researchers by creating a corpus that contains over 100 years of North Carolina public, private, and local session laws and resolutions. We are particularly interested in the laws passed during the Jim Crow era. The collection for this corpus was digitized between 2009 and 2011 under an IMLS grant program, Ensuring Democracy Through Digital Access, through a partnership among East Carolina University, the State Library of North Carolina, and the UNC libraries. On the books, we'll expand on that work by creating a plain text corpus of North Carolina session laws for general, legal, and historical research. In addition to creating the corpus, we are also using text analysis to identify discoverable North Carolina segregation statutes during the Jim Crow era, creating a project website for educators and researchers that lists and contextualizes the laws we identify, and producing a white paper that will describe our methods and our workflows. We're going to be making our scripts available in a public GitHub repository, and we have also promoted the project and related materials by giving presentations to diverse audiences, including educators in a Carolina K-12 workshop. So our team is large and cross-departmental, but even more staff are involved beyond our team. We are at an institution with these kind of staff resources that have allowed us to bring in specialists as we've needed them. In hindsight, we should have had software development written into the core team on the project, and we are fortunate that they have been able to serve as collaborators. So even with such resources, we've learned the importance of having redundancy in staff with requisite skills, a lesson we learned when Nathan, our original project lead, who served as our digital scholarship librarian, left the university. So even though he's no longer our project lead, we're pleased that he has been able to remain on the team as a collaborator. I want to speak a little bit personally, and in particular from a special collections perspective in this large context. The special collections are represented on the team by Sarah Carrier and by me in my role as executive sponsor on the project. And for me, it's proven the point of the Special Collections Digital Scholarship Working Group, specifically the need for collaboration among library specialists rather than handoffs, and the need for fluency in the tools and methods that are transforming the research environment for primary sources. I'm reminded of a line from the Collections as Data Part to Whole grant narrative, which I'll read now. Collections as data paradigm suggests that an orientation is possible that looks beyond traditionally rendered, quote, front of house and, quote, back of house dichotomies, divisions between functional and subject specialization, and divisions between technical and public services. This doesn't specifically call out special collections, which so often are set apart from even those dichotomies and divisions that are described in the quote. But I'd like to suggest that we really need to do so, and we need to call upon curators, archivists, catalogers, and librarians that inhabit the world of rare materials and archives and primary sources to engage very explicitly with this work. So as we look ahead, we're thinking about how to operationalize this, including creating capacity for research and development work that is library initiated and built, the importance of distributing technical experts across the library rather than concentrating them in one department, and continuing to increase fluency, not only around digital and data tools and methods, but also about the varied roles and responsibilities needed for successful projects of this kind.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Henley, and I'm going to talk about the process of this project, what we've been doing, and through doing so, I'll be talking about our progress on the deliverables and some of the challenges that we faced as well. I do want to acknowledge that this is a large project team, and the work that I'm presenting on is the work of this very talented team, even though only a few of us are here today. So our first goal with this project was to actually just compile a comprehensive listing of all of the volumes. It actually was a project in itself. So our corpus starts in 1865-66 and goes through 1967, and we have 96 volumes in the corpus. So our listing, once we compiled it, we used a custom written Python script to download the JP2s that we needed from the Internet Archive. And then we prepared our images for OCR. So these images show you 2 different pages from volumes of 2 different years. And so they kind of illustrate some of the challenges that we've been working through in generating this corpus. So first thing that I'll point out here is the marginalia that you'll see on the side of the page. So the marginalia is text that serves as a finding aid. It's not part of the law. And since it's kind of in itself there in the margin, if you were to OCR it, it would kind of make the law no longer make any sense. So for our purposes, obviously we had to remove that. I'll also point out that you can see that the marginalia is not in the same location on each page. Also note that these pages are just very different. The text is different, the font is different, the contrast between the back of the paper and the text is different. Also, and you'll note that the image on the right is slightly skewed. So here's a close-up of the marginalia, so you can see just how close that marginalia comes to the body of the text. So that was one of the challenges that we worked through. Our our images were cropped to remove the marginalia and rotated as needed. And then lastly, the blank color balance margins were added back to the images to improve the OCR. So all of this was done with custom Python scripts using Pillow. We use these images, the corrected images, to OCR 80,000 pages using Tesseract. We also devised a methodology to assess the accuracy of the corpus. So we've had 2 different people check the accuracy of random samples of words pulled from the corpus. So here's the spreadsheet that we used to facilitate this work. And our preliminary results indicate that the quality of the OCR is quite good. I'd love to talk more about this, but I'm kind of speeding through, so please ask me questions later. So we devised a metadata schema as well. We're going to be using XML, and we've gotten some input from our metadata librarian to help us devise this schema. Some of the examples of the elements that we're going to be including are volume, title, date range, law type, chapter, and section. So in order to do, let's see, so in addition to creating a corpus of the statutes, we also have this ambitious goal of doing text analysis on our corpus as well within the scope of this project. The way that volumes are organized is that you have chapters and then you have sections. And the individual sections are the actual laws, and that's our unit of analysis for the text analysis. So in order to be able to do that text analysis, we had to split up the corpus into the chapters and then the individual sections. There's a lot of challenges with doing that, and I've listed them here. So there are errors in the books, just the original actual books. We're talking about chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 13, chapter 23, chapter 14. These are not rare in the actual printed volumes. Then we have some volumes have the chapters and the marginalia, which of course we removed. So I had to go through those volumes by hand and find the chapter breaks. A few of the volumes have the chapters identified with Roman numerals, which did not OCR well. So that has been another challenge. Numbers OCR poorly. 2s are 5s, 5s are 2s, 3s are 8s, and vice versa. And then when you're going through and you're kind of, assessing the quality of this, are these numbers in order? You don't know if it's OCR, that's the problem, or if it's the actual book, that's the problem. So it's been a wonderful endless source of problems to solve, actually. But we're using regular expressions to fix a lot of these common errors that we're finding. This probably is going to be one of the biggest limitations of our corpus. Even so, as William said earlier, we already do have 286,000 sections or individual laws that we've been able to split out. And as we continue to improve this process, that number is going to continue to grow. So for our text analysis aspect of this project, we're relying on a couple of machine learning techniques. So we've done early exploration using both supervised and unsupervised classification of the laws to try to identify these Jim Crow laws. So for the supervised classification, we had to build a training set to train the model on what a Jim Crow law looks like. And we built that training set by using the work of Paula Murray, also a legal scholar from North Carolina named Richard Pascal. And then we also generated a random listing of laws from our corpus, which we gave to our scholarly experts, William Sturkey and Kimber Thomas. And they went through the laws that we gave them, and they classified them as either yes, Jim Crow, or no, not Jim Crow. So at this point, our training set is 800 laws. 16% of the laws in our training set are Jim Crow laws, which we assume to be an overestimate of the percentage of Jim Crow laws in the overall corpus, especially because 2 of the sources of that training set are just nothing but a list of Jim Crow laws. But it's a training set that we have that has actually been performing quite well so far. So our preliminary supervised classification uses the naive Bayes model, which is a simple classification algorithm. And in this first iteration, we've only just used the raw word frequencies for this first go round. So we did kind of an 80-20 split on our sample. So we trained the model with 80% of the training set, and then we assessed the accuracy of the model with the other 20%. So far, our preliminary results show that our model performs well on that sample. So we have a 90% accuracy on that. We're hoping to continue to improve that. This screenshot shows the results of our first unsupervised classification. So this topic model is just based on just a 5% sample of our corpus. It produced some topics that seem to make sense, but nothing that looks like Jim Crow. So our next steps here are to run this on the entire corpus and increase the number of topics to see what we find. And just kind of some broad sweeping challenges that we faced. When you're doing this work at scale, it's not going to be perfect. This is, imperfection is kind of a new territory for librarians and does not give us a feeling of ease. We've purchased these products from vendors though, right? And we know they're not perfect. And I think that when we started this project, we thought, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. We really want to be able to have, a little bit better accuracy, or at least, more documentation. So although we're realizing that this corpus is not going to be perfect, we are definitely committed to transparency, documentation, and reproducibility. And also everything that we've done is open source and will be made available in a code repository, so people will be able to build on the work that we've done and hopefully improve upon our results. So I'm at 22 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here, but I have other things that I would like to share. I'd love to talk to you about our outreach and communication and our planned activities post-grant funding, so I invite you to ask some questions about those, and also anything else that you wanted to know about. And thank you.
On the image, maybe 3 or 4 slides back, there were 4 different, that one with the 4 different sets. What are the distinctions between those 4 sets, or were they separated for presentation's sake?
So what you're seeing here is a result of a topic model. So the way topic models work are basically terms that are frequently occurring kind of close together in the text. So it's the computer's attempt to generate topics. So when you do topic modeling, you basically tell the computer, I want to create 10 topics. I want to create 20 topics. And then it'll give you these group of words. And then it's up to the human being to go in and assign the topics meaningful categories. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
I would like to know more about the post-grant planned activities.
Funny you should ask about our post-grant activities. Sarah Carrier, who Maria has already mentioned, works in special collections, and she has a very good relationship with Carolina K-12, which is a unit on campus. And she's worked with the North Caroliniana Society to help get some funding for Carolina K-12 to develop curricular materials for K-12 using the results of our work. So that's kind of an extension of our work. So once we have finished, they'll kind of go from there. We also plan to continue to improve the corpus. I would love it if what we produce before April is version 1 of the corpus. We're also going to be seeking additional funding to hopefully continue this work. Yes.
So I just have a couple of questions about the basically like the research design setup for the supervised machine learning, because you have a training set that's relatively small, and then you have a second class that is a much smaller percentage of that relatively small set. So I'm wondering if you had some reporting on not just the accuracy of that model, but like how well specifically does it find the Jim Crow laws, and how many false positives does it have to produce in order to do that? Because not so much the accuracy, but actually the recall and the precision are really the measures of whether it's doing this well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is very preliminary results. So the results I received on Christmas. So very early on results of what we have right now. But what I will say is I got a CSV with 8,000, I think, individual Jim Crow laws that could potentially be Jim Crow laws. And what we have there is our rank percentage likelihood of whether or not this law is a Jim Crow law based on the model output. So, you know, sorting at the top, starting at the ones that are most likely. I'm seeing a lot of laws that do not look like Jim Crow laws to me as an untrained person. I'm also seeing quite a few laws that do look like Jim Crow laws. So I think that, you know, we have an imperfect system because if you think about Jim Crow laws in their very nature, very often the point, you know, how they were written is not to be explicit, but the way that they were carried out. So we have examples of those in our training set as well. So, you know, I think that, I think it's an imperfect training set and an imperfect way to kind of classify these laws as either yes or no. You know, originally I think that we thought we were going to go in and we were going to find all of the Jim Crow laws, and then we were going to read through them all, and we were going to put them on our website and provide some contextualization. Ultimately, what I think we're going to end up with is multiple corpora. So we'll have our corpus showing of the general statutes, and then we'll have a corpus of the Jim Crow laws and some type of metadata included in that, and as to the likelihood of it being a Jim Crow law according to our model. Yeah.
So thank you for the presentation. You can tell there's like tons of cross-departmental work that or even like division work that's happened, you know, in order to make this project go. Tough for a lot of organizations, and I'm just wondering if you can speak specifically about maybe a challenge that you encountered and how you addressed it in the course of your work.
Challenge in working across different departments.
Yeah.
Do either one of you guys want to address that or not?
Have we encountered challenges?
I mean, I think that we've,
I'd like to say that as from where I sit, there's been a lot of enthusiasm for the work. And one of the great benefits of having such a team with such diverse domain knowledge and expertise is that no one person on the team can do this whole project, and we all know different things that flow out of that. Maybe I should do that. And so one of the examples I was thinking of is the name that you see up here, Richard Pascal. The only reason we know about his work is because he has worked with Sarah Carrier as a researcher, and he had received a research grant that brought him to the library because he was doing a project that was trying to build a list, continue the list building of Jim Crow laws. And that really changed the opportunity that we had for the training model, where we started thinking we were going to have Paula Murray and William Sturkey. And now we have 4 because Kimber Thomas is a clear postdoc that joined the library, and we brought her on board to try to help us with this particular aspect of it. So I feel like there's been more interest than perhaps we've been able to contain, to be honest. We've had people approaching us to try to be part of the conversations, our co-working sessions, our update meetings. So that's my perspective, but I don't know if it's different for this piece of it, like bringing in.
So I think it's just been, I think we've laid some groundwork. So Maria's vision in establishing this digital scholarship special collections working group, I think really laid a lot of the groundwork that kind of eased this this project along, because we were already working with our colleagues in special collections. We have, and I think also that Digital Research Services is a group that works across libraries all the time anyways. We work with IT a lot. We work with the repository folks. We work with special collections. We work with research and instruction. So I think that's been also one thing that's helped us work across departments as well.
Does that answer your question, Thomas?
I think so. Yeah.
Was there a particular challenge that you had in mind or maybe that we've seen in other teams that?
A couple of
The slot too, but I think we're at time. If
Okay.
you want to
Yes.
hear about this, and we'll share the challenges that we face as a group with everyone as well. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
That was great. Thank you.
I feel bad. Oh my
Yeah. We decided.
Don't worry, we'll be here all day.
Should we take like an impromptu, like a 5?
I think it's already.
Yeah, I think we'll take it, yeah. Okay. Do you want to hold on the presentation for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I might also.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Oh, it's a-
Oh. No.
Oh, no, that's his. I was like, how did our presentation get there?
No, I could use mine meter. It,
No. Oh, okay, you have to capitalize. I did a camel case, so. Practice this like 5 times on my phone before. So lost jazz is the J is capitalized.
Everything.
The S and S.
If we do this, no agreement on what.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Is it allowed? Wait, let me see. Oh, this is real. So I just re-added that. Okay, perfect. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then people can stare at it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, really great. Guys.
And then I guess we don't have to add this.
I think it would be best just leave it sitting so that there's no not going to change it between our.
I do. I just feel I'm fine with that. We'll leave it right here. Hopefully they'll catch it, and I'm gonna do that.
Totally do that.
Yeah. I took it out.
That allows for.
Oh, thank you. I realized that, there's a thing to do contact with the
I think you want to do something.
Okay.
Don't even worry about that.
Oh, goodness. Oh, man, I was trying to. I couldn't find his email or something. Contact with the museum, I don't know. And then I find something, I don't know.
Oh, no. Yeah, we didn't figure it out, but.
Are you guys still in New York? Or?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm still involved with all this project and potential. Yeah. It's also like the end of graduate school. Like, every, this May, in May I graduated. And then since then I have yeah, just like juggling everything, so.
It's
I know,
too,
like,
like, things also.
Yeah, like, I'm looking all over
So, yeah, maybe it's.
We don't have a great thing to enter. It's not like it's now we're signed. Yeah. And the work is not as oh, it is for sure, but. Yeah, so what is that? It's a search. No, it's a search engine. Okay. But it's just like really fast. And so we get a little. Yeah. They're. Since you know, you can live your own. Like, they just.
So what do you think?
Optimize it certain way.
What do you want to do?
So it's like an outside component that you like incorporated into the content of it. Like we, basically everything we search, then make a request out. Okay. The image, all the searchable data is in Lilium. You haven't heard it before? No. Sorry. Yeah.
You know what? I think that's fine.
I got me walking version.
We're good to go. You guys
I'm just gonna start. And I don't have to speak into the mic. Hi, my name is Upton Mundasier. I am the Oral History Manager at the Weeksville Heritage Center. And in this introduction, I will briefly go over the background on the Weeksville Heritage Center, the Weeksville Lost Jazz Shrines of Brooklyn collection, Looking Lost Jazz Shrines project, and our project collaborators. And for reference, on the top left here is our bit.ly site for these slides, and they will be at the bottom left for the rest of the presentation. So first, the Weeksville Heritage Center is a historic house museum and cultural center located in central Brooklyn. The houses belonged to an early 19th century free Black community that existed from the 1830s until the 1920s and was rediscovered and preserved by local activists and researchers in the late 1960s. The houses received landmark status in 1971, and throughout the decades, they were rehabilitated and opened as a house museum in 2005. And in 2006, the Weeksville Lost Jazz Shrines of Brooklyn collection began when the research staff created a list of questions that they wanted to analyze by looking at Brooklyn's jazz culture. And what they wanted to look at specifically was key musicians and locales while collecting these oral histories. And between 2006 and 2010, around over 25 interviews were collected, made available online for a period of time through an exhibition, and also exhibited physically in the cultural center that opened in 2014. So through our legacy project in 2017, where Zakia Collier, as an intern, was working on our extant oral histories, she suggested that we should work with the Link Jazz at Pratt to reprocess our collection in regard to the Lost Jazz Shrines, as Link Jazz was making lesser known jazz musicians more prominently known through their tools and data sets. And they were revealing relationships within the jazz community. So the Linking Lost Jazz Shrine project has two main goals. The first is to apply linked open data principles to the Weeksville Heritage Center Lost Jazz Shrines project collection through Omeka S. And the second thing was to prepare both our collections related to the Lost Jazz Shrines and the existing linked jazz data set to make them inoperable or interoperable with one another. And we were really excited to resuscitate our connection with Pratt, with Link Jazz, as in the beginning of the rediscovery of the houses, Pratt was with us. One of the early directors of Weeksville was a professor at the University of Pratt, and they helped immensely with the research that was being conducted during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, who will be talking about the processes and workflows that we developed during this project.
Thank you so much. All right. So my name is Sarah. I am a liaison from the Semantic Lab at Pratt for this project with Weeksville. Linked Jazz is a project of the Semantic Lab at Pratt, so it's kind of nested organizationally. As Oakton mentioned, there are two main goals of this project. The first goal of the project to be creating linked data from the oral histories of the lost jazz shrines. And then the second goal of the project was to make this data that we were going to discover and find and create interoperable with the linked jazz data set. So one of the first things that we did as far as discovery is concerned was to do a quick scan to see what the overlap of the two data sets would be. And as of right now, there are 29 oral histories in the Lost Jazz Shrines data set, and not even all of them have been fully transcribed or entities detected. But we've already found 172 people that fill the gap of being within both data sets. So that's very exciting for us because it shows that what we thought this project, this collaboration could be is true, that there will be an overlap, and that because of the collaboration, the linked jazz data set will grow. So the Linked Jazz project is a linked open data project that is focusing primarily on the relationships between musicians, so people individually. And this here on the left is an image of the Linked Jazz visualization. And it's into this visualization we hope that our data will eventually be integrated. And so with Linked Jazz, people were related to each other by existing ontological vocabularies. So for example, Ella Fitzgerald was an acquaintance of Louis Armstrong, or was a friend of, or was influenced by Louis Armstrong. And the Linked Jazz project also minted or created new types of relationships to use in the linked data context. For example, if two people played together, that wasn't yet a relationship that could be deployed in a linked data context, or toured with, or was in a band with, etc. And one thing I do want to mention, because I didn't mention it before, is that the Linked Jazz project has the same basic structure in the sense that the data is culled from oral history. So that's another similarity between the two projects. This is a lot of visual information. It's only to look pretty for everyone out there. But this is very exciting for me because I get to sit in between the existing properties and relationships used by the Linked Jazz project, and also thinking about the new properties and the new things that we want to describe with the Weeksville oral history collections. So one thing to note, as previously mentioned, the Linked Jazz project only is considering relationships between individual people. This data set, it's in the title, Lost Jazz Shrines. We're also interested in locations. And in addition to that, we've also expanded our interest of main entities to be musical groups. So band leaders of groups rather than a person being a person in another person's band. So a lot of the work I've been doing recently is understanding the base of the Linked Jazz vocabulary and connecting that with another music linked data project, the Carnegie Hall Linked Data Project, looking at their model, and combining those two in order to have a solid ground to be able to propose new properties that will be useful for the Weeksville project, but also useful for Linked Jazz and also useful for Carnegie Hall. And something that's quite interesting about oral histories is that, for example, the way that a lot of performance information is expressed in linked data is through an event. So a person is at an event and an event takes place at a location. With these oral histories, we don't necessarily have event information. So we don't have all of the information required to fulfill the existing model. So we're creating shortcut relationships. So we're, for example, one of the relationships we are proposing is performed at. So that can relate a person directly to a location rather than having to go through a performance, which is information that's not existing in the oral histories themselves. So going back to Omeka S, that from the beginning has been something that this project is based on, we have decided that Omeka S will act as the landing page for Weeksville, the first way that many people will interact with this data. And with that in mind, we are not entirely sure how familiar everyone here is with Omeka S, but we are deciding to create three main types of entities on Omeka S, being the transcripts themselves, the interviewees, the individual people, and then any jazz shrine or location they mention in the oral histories. And within the OMECA-S structure, we will create links between those entities. That said, these oral histories have so many more relationships and so many more types of information that can be expressed. And in addition to that, we also need to be creating this data in the same environment so that it can be interoperable with linked jazz. All of that is to say, is the data itself is mainly going to live in something called a wiki base. And Wikibase is similar, it's in the same family as other Wikimedia Foundation projects, Wikipedia being one. But Wikidata is the underlying structure of Wikipedia, and it also serves as a structured data location. You can create, ingest, and query data. So that's where the data is going to be living as a whole. And then the applicable and the entities we're most interested in will be highlighted on the OMECA-S. This is a lot of visual information, but for reference, we are in a very temporary working space because this is a collaboration and we have oral histories that we want to be processed, but we are also utilizing the Wikibase of the Semantic Lab, which is in production, as well as a Semantic Lab tool called C'est La Vie, which is also in production. And right now, we are working on preparing the transcripts to be able to fed into C'est La Vie, to make the triples, to be able to create the triples in Wikibase. But because those two technical components are not yet ready, we can't fully realize that full workflow. So right now, our workflow is simpler. And what that entails is preparing the transcripts within a Google Docs environment so that we already identify and know the people we want to create linked data about, the places we want to create linked data, and the groups we want to create linked data. And and we can see on the top right of the screen, we have created one temporary, we've created linked data temporarily for one entire transcript, which is very exciting because we got to see what this is going to look like in the Wikibase itself. And it also presented, it presented us with the ability to look at, okay, how did our implementation of this plan work with the data model? And that gives you an opportunity to either revise the data model or revise the guidelines we've set out for ourselves in creating the linked data triples. Wrong computer. Yes, so this reiterates what I just said, is that right now, because we're waiting for the larger technical components to become available to us, there is still, with 29 transcripts, plenty of work to be doing as far as preparing the data and renegotiating the data model and renegotiating our triple making guidelines, so our rules for ourselves. So, and we are also creating a Google documentation site. Everyone will have wonderful documentation. We've decided to put ours in Google for now because visually it's easier to explain everything in the process. If you have these visual modules, you can move back and forth. And a personal challenge for me, and even in preparing this presentation, is because so many components of this project are parts of each other and are linked with each other, it's very hard to conceptualize how to present this information in a way that makes sense. So we're working through that, and the documentation site is not finished because we are not finished. But the documentation site serves as record keeping for ourselves. But anytime we're speaking about our decisions, we are also making the effort to describe how could this be applied to other institutions, other groups of people who want to do a similar type of project. For example, we chose Wikibase to create our unique and permanent identifiers. But what if you want to choose something else? What are your options? So now I'm going to hand it off to Zakia, who's going to talk about challenges, successes, etc. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So I will say that our thoughts so far is that this has been pretty successful. I think my colleagues over here will agree, but that has not been without its challenges. Some of the areas where we found successes, we also find challenges as well. One of those being the project topic selection.
So as Ogden said before, we sort of came to this topic through my work as an intern, where I'm inputting these oral histories into Omeka, and I'm just like, all these connections are happening between these different interviews. So this person is mentioning that they were mentored by Miles Davis, and this person played with them, and I'm just seeing all of these connections. And at the same time, becoming aware of the Linked Jazz Network at the Semantic Lab at Pratt. And so it was just like a perfect opportunity to sort of put these two projects together to expand this network. But also jazz is just known for its rich, like vast network, and the sort of project director at Semantic Lab, Christina, is like, that's sort of how Linked Jazz got started, is just because jazz is just crossovers everywhere. Everybody knows everyone. This person's played with this person one time. Everybody's friends. And it's really cool to sort of learn just how many people have been influenced by everyone. Let's see. So there's just a lot of crossover, which made it very easy to sort of create these triples and to later visualize them. A challenge with this particular topic and using this collection is because these interviews weren't collected with data in mind. This was just a project that was started in 2006. And so really the project wanted to recognize that many of these shrines in Brooklyn were going unnoticed, and Brooklyn is still very quickly gentrifying. And so many of these these shrines are actually lost, and they've become pharmacies and other types of bars and coffee shops. And they really wanted to sort of focus on making those well-known and that people don't forget that sort of historical memory of Brooklyn. And so in reading the transcripts, there is sort of a human component where we have to really, we read them and we're sort of like, they only have a first name here. And it's like, okay, now we have to figure out which Miles this is, and we can maybe make the assumption that it's Miles Davis or that this Randy is Randy Weston. But because they weren't imagining that this would be a project that needs to have like an actual identifier that is machine readable, there's a bit of work of going through the transcript and having to make these clarifications. But luckily, we have some domain expertise that helps out in that process. And so the actual interviewer the main interviewer for most of these transcripts was Willard Jenkins, who is both a jazz scholar and a jazz musician. And so in his interviewing, he asks very specific questions and sometimes makes the connections that the interviewee fails to make. So an example of that would be like, oh, you're talking about blah, 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 or this happened at this place, right? Or this was the performance where this person, like, I don't know, got kicked out of the club. And so they'll be like, yes, that's the one. And they'll start telling another story. And then like sort of the interviewer helps to sort of facilitate these connections that otherwise wouldn't be there just by nature of oral history and people just sort of brain dumping on a recording. On the other side of that, the transcribers for many of these oral histories were interns who did not have the same domain expertise. So again, with the problem of not having the full name, sometimes there's question marks because the person doesn't really understand what the person, like the name that they were using, or there just wasn't sort of a lot of detail taking and spelling things correctly or like fully spelling them out. So if someone used an acronym, the transcriber didn't actually list what the acronym stood for, maybe because they didn't know, or it just wasn't needed for the purpose of why they were doing these interviews in the first place. On the other side of that, we again have domain experts in triple making. So the triple makers for right now being myself and Sarah, me having the natural language expertise. Many of these oral histories are using African-American vernacular English, of which I'm an expert as an African-American who speaks English. So I'm pretty good at sort of understanding. Sometimes there are elements of African American vernacular English, such as the habitual be, which sort of articulates that this person visited the place multiple times, but they may say it in a way that isn't necessarily like, I went to this place many times. It's just like, we used to be there. And that means that we would be there all the time. And so that sort of helps in going through to be like, okay, this is a place where this person performed multiple times versus this is a place that they just were at in this instance. And Sarah, being the linked data expert, is able to, along with me, go through the transcript and say, this is something that would be really good for making a triple, or for like the example she gave earlier, she's like, well, we can really only make this connection if we say this person performed at this particular performance at this place, and then we can connect these people, or we could do the shortcut way. So together, the two of us sort of negotiate what makes a good triple or what is the relationship between two entities. Minimum metadata required. So in going through these transcripts and Jazz having this really rich network, it is very easy to like go overboard, because these oral histories are people that are like mostly older, and they are just, like I said, brain dumping. They're just like, I just want to tell you every story about everything that has ever happened in jazz in Brooklyn in my lifetime. And these oral histories are also conducted a bit to know about these people themselves. So again, these oral histories are created for a number of reasons. In order to like bring out information about these locations, to learn more about these musicians and club owners, and then to just like broaden the history about jazz in Central Brooklyn. And so there are sometimes relationships there where the person is talking about what high school they went to, what college they went to, maybe a choir that they were a part of as a child, and that's sort of how they got into music, or that they were really particularly inspired by their mom, but they don't give their mom's name. And then it's very easy to be like, well, we have to find the mom's name. And then we're like researching like, this person has a famous dad, so maybe we can find out who the mom is. And it's like, wait, we don't actually want to like articulate that relationship in our network. Yes, they're inspired by this person, but it's not worth the work of like trying to find out who mom is, if it's not like easily found, like easily discoverable. So minimum metadata required is really a concept where we had to just think about what are the relationships that we really want to articulate here, and not like let it balloon just because we have the information available. And we could always go back later and like add those relationships in there. Tool selection. So this is something that has sort of shifted throughout our project. When we first applied for the grant, we were like, okay, we're going to use Osmeca because we already have Omeka Classic, which we didn't even know that much about Osmeca. And then we found out about Omeka S, and we're like, yes, Omeka S. We've just sort of realized that it's important to have this data living in multiple places. So in thinking about who our target audience is, we have our Weeksville constituents, which are just sort of local Brooklynites, mostly African American. And they are mostly interested in making these familial connections, genealogy, and learning more about their community. And then we also have researchers that sort of like know about this collection by nature of being connected to Willard Jenkins and then some of the interviewees. And so we wanted to have a couple of different ways to present the data. Omeka S being like the landing page for Weeksville. So it's very easily searchable, it's Dublin core, and it makes it easy to visualize and like create a page that just tells people about the project. They can listen to the oral histories and also be connected to the wiki base, where people can query the data and sort of do that's mostly for the researchers to be able to ask questions of it. And then also have GitHub, where there's just a data dump for anyone who wants to use the data for whatever purpose. And so this is a bit for presentation and for targeting specific audiences, but also as a data management strategy of having it decentralized and in multiple places. And the last thing I'll talk about will be our collaboration and our timeline. So as you may have heard, we are all sort of in different places. And at the beginning of this project, I was at Weeksville full time, and I've transitioned to a different institution. And so we now have like the project team is all in 3 different places at all times. So that makes it a bit challenging to sort of take care of some tasks. And we find ourselves like trying to get to coffee shops at 7 p.m. and they're closed sometimes, and it's raining, and you're standing there like, how are we going to do this project? And then we go to another coffee shop, and it's like across town. Coffee shops don't like to stay open that late, even though people drink coffee after 6 p.m. But so it's a bit challenging to sort of get us all in the same place at the same time, and like coordinating phone calls when we're all at different institutions with different responsibilities. But it has been largely successful, and we've made it work, and we just move to multiple coffee shops if we have to. And that's also been a bit of a challenge in terms of the timeline, specifically with the development of the C'est la Vie tool, which we are waiting on to sort of do this triple making. Even though we have, like Sarah mentioned, have more than enough work in preparing the documents for the C'est la Vie tool, it is sort of like we're anticipating that happening soon, but that sort of involves the staff at the semantic lab while we wait. And then there's just like a lot of transitions and waiting there. But that just sort of gives us more time to work on other parts and to like start our documentation site, which helps us again to sort of like refine our processes along the way. And now I'll pass this back to Ogden so he can talk about our planned activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so moving forward with our planned activities, one of the bigger events we plan to have is a symposium, which happens, an annual symposium that happens with the Central Brooklyn Jazz Consortium, where we'll have a jazz festival. It's a jazz festival, but like we'll also discuss how to include like open data and talks and performances. Moving forward, as the oral history project manager at Weeksville, we plan to incorporate a Wikimedia fellow, so turning the space into a site where the fellow can help continue this work. We recently included the NYU MEAP program, where an intern will work with me within the spring semester. We're working on this. And then we also will be doing a series of workshops for the education department at Weeksville and the research department, which it's me and Julia, who's our collections manager. But the idea is to develop workshops for the general population that we work with, which includes graduate programs that work in archives, high schools that we've worked with before with Omeka, and the general public that come and learn how to use archival information as we've done through the legacy projects. And yeah, those are the plans that we have moving forward in regards to our planned activities. So I'd like to thank you for your time, and now I'm going to ask if you have any questions, even though we're... I will repeat the question for you. All right.
Thank you so much. I have a question for Zakiya and Sarah. You talked about your collaboration together, domain expertise and linked data expertise. And one question I have about that is, I don't know a lot about triplets and triples and all that stuff, but like, how well is it able to capture ambiguity of vernacular? Or like, are you having to make hard decisions to lose ways in which people speak, or is it able to capture that in different ways, like nicknames or ways in which people represent place in different ways?
Yeah. Can I start? Yeah. Okay. So it's a really good question, and even the question you've asked touches on multiple parts of the process that aren't even part of the same part of each part of the process. So like thinking about, so as a explanation of the C'est la Vie tool, what the C'est la Vie tool is what you do is you'll add content into the tool. the tool will feed it to named entity recognition software, kind of like 6 named entity recognition softwares that have been put together. And then it'll bring you back to the C'est La Vie area and it'll show you all the named entities that it recognizes. And so that's the automatic component. But there is a component where you can go in and review it manually and say, okay, this didn't get picked up, but this is a person, this is a nickname, etc. So that's one way to tackle the part of that problem of one person having a lot of nicknames. What you can actually do is paint the words the same color. And it's more than just being a color, but what it does is it co-locates all of those different names to be the same entity. So that answers that particular component of the question. I didn't even repeat the question, like I said, open too. Can you ask the other parts of the question again?
Oh, I guess it was, then once the tool does that work, like, is that information that both between the machine and human, is that actually captured in the triple data? Right? Does that get it? Does that make sense?
It's a little bit of a difficult question to answer because we haven't been able to realize that process the whole way through.
Okay.
And so right now what we're doing is we're creating the permanent URIs for those people, places, and relationships. So when we were creating those URIs, and then once we put the information through the C'est La Vie tool, we can use those URIs to identify those relationships. And then the relationships themselves will be described with like a natural language, like this relationship means X. And the beauty of linked data is that each of those 3 components are clickable links, and you can learn more about that entity or that relationship. So that's where some of the vernacular components of the things that are being discussed can be captured and more fully described, rather than being in the actual triples themselves. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I sort of briefly touched on, like right now we are like sort of going through the transcripts, which we're like putting into a Google Doc in order to sort of control the vocabulary that is there. So a bit of either changing things that are listed as like a nickname, or maybe it's misspelled, and making sure to like change it to the correct spelling so that once it is in the tool that it is able to be identified in that way. In terms of like the vernacular, that the tool is not necessarily built to do that. It's really just to recognize the entities. And then we sort of, based on going through the transcripts manually, we're able to go through and say, this is what this relationship is. Thank you.
Haven't done it all yet, so we're hoping we're hoping a process reveals itself.
You just said how to do it. So
Okay.
that's what I do.
So we are at time, definitely, but we can ask more questions during the break, which is happening now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a 5-minute break. That's pretty short. There is coffee and water in that room that we started this morning. We see you back here in 5 minutes.
Oh, I would be if I had a, and that guy goes down, yeah.
Well, I mean, I wanted to be with you. That should be good.
And that's what I like about it. Even though ours is not really like swapping analysis of data,
It's like a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Literally,
Keep calling. Are you having fun? Oh, good. I think it's it doesn't force.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a button. That must be like because of recess. Oh. Probably a good practice. If it turns it off, then that would have to be like. You know how your power. Oh, okay, so it's like, yeah.
Presenting without caffeine.
No. That one could be really good.
Who is that comedian?
We don't have any balls.
You spoke slowly?
Yes, he had a joke that was like, I find that ducks opinion of me is highly based on whether or not I have to. And he always had his eyes closed, like sometimes wore sunglasses to hide it, but he was like. It's always stoned, yeah. You should see, like, look up his, you love it. Like, he'll be on like Letterman, and he's just like.
But it's so dark in the morning and I don't like waking up.
What do you call a broken stairs?
That's the only thing that's.
Stairs.
It was before the light came out. That's what made me realize we had.
Yeah.
I guess that text when I was reading my body was like, hi, what's up? It was like, okay. And I listened because if I try to go back to sleep, I'll wake up worse than yours. So. Any school today? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right, you know Lester.
Right.
I'll go back to sleep if I can stop for an hour and a half, or another 3 hours, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm always like.
So one of the things I should mention, and I forgot to mention, is that you can like lower the lower and raise. To do with, empowering yourself with the ability to raise and lower the lectern, I guess. And the mic is live right now for the live stream.
Worse.
Oh, man.
It's better now than it was actually. It's worse. But it's because I do things like, I can't like do work. Yeah, I wake up at 4. Like if I teach a night class, I just don't schedule out. I do too.
Yeah.
But I still am I just don't do anything during that. I don't sleep.
Yeah.
Makes it really worth it.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So initially, on
most years, yeah. And I like, if I'm driving, I try to put the hand so that I can control that.
actually going
There's no audio.
No audio. I even have 3 years worth of
Yeah. If I play sleep, yes, I could just sleep on the planet, make sure I'm on the window, so I get, but let's not go crazy. One will have to see. I think,
Sleep much better if I just get ready to exercise. 2 to 3 times a week. I mean, metaphorically.
Literally, I'm sure you found out.
We're doing it, it's happening. So, I guess, with other organizations, like the Smithsonian. And so, like, I know they were like, really fast Heritage Foundation. And they reach out to different organizations, not initial. There weren't anything I could say because we've had a hard time with that archive in particular. Yes, I like to tell you. I think that like Jazz has done so this project has it because we're focusing on history, but like that yeah, I don't know anything about it, but I like it. Oh, really? It's amazing. Yeah. I pictured this. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Some of the oral documents like that. They've been looking for like a jazz cataloger or like somebody working with the jazz collection at their library. There's so many.
You guys are ready?
All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started as we launch eventually. Thanks for allowing us to share some of our progress on this project. And I also want to say that this has just been one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of in my career. Your all's projects are just fantastic, and I'm just grateful to be here. So our project, in a nutshell, for those of you who weren't here at the last forum, or for those of you streaming, is essentially an attempt to optimize handwritten text recognition software to read our archival data, particularly one specific special collection that we have. I am here with my colleagues Kim Pham, who runs our technology services department, Jeff Reinhardt, who's one of our software developers, and Alice Tarrant, who leads our digitization operation. Jeannie Abrams, Kevin Clare, and Fernando Reyes also were deeply involved in this project, but weren't able to be here today. I'm going to talk about kind of the background of the project, our intent in doing this, and a little bit about our ethical considerations, because that became one of the more sort of important aspects of this in this particular project. Turn it over to Kim, and we'll do some project management. Alice and Jeff will talk about the underlying technology and our progress in it, and then they'll go back to Kim, who's going to wrap up and talk about our next steps. So I'm going to take you back about 3 years. When I arrived at the University of Denver, we were running an open source software stack for our digital repository that we essentially inherited from a collaborative project, and we were struggling with it a little bit. We were also going through a large-scale IT reorganization across campus that honestly continues to this day, and we had no information technologies librarian. So all of that kind of culminated in me talking to our developers about what should we do about all this, right? So I just listened to them, and we decided to sort of tear all of this apart and and try something new, build a more modularized, flexible repository. I'm not going to walk you through this graph. Kim will talk a little bit more about it, but leverage existing systems that maybe other people were running to realize some efficiencies. And I was also particularly interested in some handwritten text recognition software that I'd seen in other systems. We were talking a little bit to a vendor about that, and on one of Kim's first days anyway, we went to lunch and we came back and was talking about the handwritten text stuff. And she said, we can do that. And I said, okay, let's do it. At the same time, we saw a collections as data presentation at CNI, and voila, we decided to go for it. One of the reasons we decided to go for it is because one of our best collections, or most heavily used, and I think really kind of unique collections, are all of the records of the Jewish Consumptives Relief Society. So this was a tuberculosis sanatorium in the Denver area and hospital that was sort of turn of the century through the Second World War, and it treated without charge anybody of any faith that they could handle from across the country. So it has medical records, correspondence, checks, images, any sort of documents a hospital would keep. These are heavily used in both teaching and research at the University of Denver. Jewish history, a lot of genealogical stuff, history of medicine, diseases of the urban poor, sociology of immigration, and we've always known, what else can this be used for if we were to particularly sort of pull it all out and allow computers to sort of analyze it. These are two images here that kind of show you what we're dealing with, right? It's handwriting, and it's difficult to kind of read. So we applied for the grant, and one of the questions we got from the team, which I'm really glad they asked, which is, can you talk a little bit more about the ethics of this, right? Because we can do this. There's no HIPAA, FERPA. We don't need IRB protocols for. They asked us to think more about that, and we realized just because we can doesn't mean we should do this. There's also, I think you all know, and this is continuing to this day, this hideous kind of rise of anti-Semitism, or maybe reemergence or emboldening of anti-Semitism. And so I stayed up a few nights kind of working about this. So at the last forum, we got a lot of guidance from Sharon Leon at Michigan State University. And we talked to and reviewed materials in a couple other kind of similar projects, one an AIDS history project at California, San Francisco, the Colored Convention project at Delaware and others. We then formed an ethics advisory board when we got back to Denver. We have a physician, an attorney, a law librarian, and a medical and bioethicist at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Kind of shared all this stuff with them and had one of my favorite meetings of the year, which was this awesome sort of philosophical conversation around, do you anonymize this stuff or do you not anonymize this stuff? So we ended up in kind of a hybrid approach where we're going to provide the transcripts alongside the images on a document by document basis. And then we're going to ask for researcher intent when they want to access Jeff's API and have them sign a terms of use agreement. I'm not going to read the entire terms of use agreement, so I can turn it over to the people who did a lot of this work. But essentially tries to provide some guidance to people when to anonymize and redact people's names because we're protecting them, or we would ask researchers to protect them, and when not to do that, right? Because we want to recognize their humanity and not treat them simply as anonymous data, right? So if someone publishes on these data, we're going to ask them to include some version of what you see on the screen in their publication, and I'll read this to you. This work was made possible in part by the patients, staff, nurses, and physicians and community of the Jewish Consumptives Relief Society. People who lived, worked, and died at the JCRS sought to relieve human suffering. I'm grateful to them. So on behalf of the project team, we too are grateful to them, and I'll say too that in the course of this work, their humanity has become incredibly apparent to us. These are Charles and Jenny to us at this point. Charles had terrible handwriting. He's the physician. He was impatient with his daughter's artistic ambitions. Jenny was a pretty darn good poet. One young man who applied for entry to the sanatorium and asked what his next of kin were, he said, "I have no one." So we, I think, are trying to strike a really good balance between providing these data so that people can do research while also protecting and honoring these individuals. So I'm going to turn over to Kim, who's going to talk about project management.
Yep. So just to talk a little bit about the project structure. As we were writing our grant proposal, one concern we wanted to address at the beginning was how to make collections as data sustainable. In terms of workload across the different departments and people involved, and also in terms of integrating the project into regular department activities. during and especially beyond the duration of the grant. So first, it made a big difference for us to have from the get-go library administration sign-off to work on the project. And that was helpful. Collections' data, the grant process had already kind of integrated and tried to encourage us to get supporting statements to do so. So having that in place, it allowed us to say that we were going to prioritize this project over other projects that were already in our queue and to have our time protected to work on it. We were also intentional about spreading out the work over a longer period of time over the entire year and to keep everyone's roles and responsibilities the same, but having this work kind of integrated into those existing roles. So that meant that the project needs to be distributed across departments without doing much reorganization based on existing goals and activities in that department. So trying to build that out into future work plans and future goals as they were planning out activities for that year. One downside we noticed with that model is that the work was becoming a bit siloed. So it was still important to have someone that would kind of communicate and work and coordinate between the different departments to kind of hold these project meetings that brings different individuals together on a regular basis. That gives us the time and space to communicate and share updates and knowledge from each other, especially since we are all kind of like working with this collection, trying to delve deeper into working with this collection and working with new technologies that we're all kind of pretty unfamiliar with. Another aspect of trying to make this project sustainable is trying to use our existing infrastructure as much as possible when it makes sense to, rather than trying to build something new or adopt something new in order to make sure that we can manage existing technical resources. So our project involved integrating features into our current digital repository, and any new tools or processes that we had to adopt would become part of our everyday workflows. This work that we wanted to do to integrate features into our existing repository is part of a larger effort to consolidate the various repository technologies that when I got here we were using, and trying to align these different technologies closely to the services offered by the library as a whole. So our repository, you saw the diagram earlier, is kind of our end goal repository design is designed in such a way that it has the support of multiple partners on and off campus. So we have a streaming media server that is supported through IT. We have a archival description metadata system using ArchiveSpace, which is in part managed by our state library consortium. And we have Archivematic and DuraCloud, which we also get support through our vendor partners, Artifactual and Lyrasis. So everyone being able to work together, it kind of makes it sustainable so that there's no one point of failure that would make the whole system go down. So this is a small screenshot of our timeline that was from our original proposal, which we've kind of used as our guidelines and refer back to and made modifications in terms of deadlines along the way. It shows the different phases in our project, some of which had to happen concurrently, and it was important for us to time some of the deliverables because sometimes one phase relied on the completion of another phase or deliverable in a project. So we designed our project to have 5 major phases, each phase involving different actors from different departments in the library. So the 2 phases that have really taken up most of our time during this period thus far has been the data preparation pipeline and the delivery platform phase. So data preparation heavily involves Alice's team. She works in the digital collection services department to select materials and to generate these transcripts. They're using the open source handwriting text recognition system called Transcribus, and that comes from the READ project. That stands for Recognition and Enrichment of Archival Documents, funded by the European Commission and largely directed through the University of Innsbruck. And we're using that tool to recognize the text of historical manuscripts, and that's similar to how optical character recognition can recognize characters from machine readable text. And Alice is going to talk a bit more about that technology soon. The other phase that we've been working on especially in the last couple of months, is through our department, Library Technology Services, that Jeff and I work in. And that's been focused on building out enhancements to our digital repository that we manage. So we have transcripts, and as they're being produced, they'll be stored and made accessible through 2 primary access points through our repository. One through an API to provide access to our index and to get to the raw transcript and metadata materials, and also through in-text search.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology we're using, Transcribus. So Transcribus is an application that provides us automated handwritten text recognition of digitized documents. And the way it does this is through machine learning. Now, we could be here all day talking about what exactly that means. But in this case, what it means is it creates a statistical model based on a subset of data, and then it can use that model to make predictions about the wider set. So in our specific case, that means we provide Transcribus with a manually transcribed set of documents, and then they can automatically transcribe similar documents in the future. So after we've scanned and digitized our documents and loaded them into a program, we have to, before we can start transcribing, we need to do layout analysis. And what this does, it allows the model to associate parts of the image with lines, especially if the lines are curved, weird lengths, things like that. We have 2 methods of doing this. We have automatic. We have Transcribe It, do it for us. This is very fast, but it tends to make a lot of mistakes, especially on things with unconventional formats or different size of text. And depending on the size of the document, we might waste more time than we save fixing mistakes. So we only use those on uniformly formatted pieces of text, like letters, where it's just line by line. The other one we use is manual. This can be quite slow, can be a real bottleneck for time. But we can be very precise about the position and orientation of all the lines. So we'll tend to use this for more complex formats. We have a lot of checks, a lot of patient applications, stuff like that, that's better for. And here, I'm just going to show a little video of some of this, what the layout analysis and the transcribing. So first we have to select a text box, which is a region of related text. Because Transcribus uses context around it, we need to group bits of text together. I cut it there. It usually takes a few minutes. And then you can see it puts down the lines right here, and we can just start transcribing. The lines correspond to those numbers up there. And you can see this is at like 5 times speed too. Some of these words are really hard to figure out. Oh, no. Just want to go later in the video. Okay, yeah. And so here is manual transcription. So we literally just have to, first we still need to do the text box. And then after that, we just literally draw lines under each of the lines of text. Okay. So when we are transcribing, we have to be really careful. Any conventions we use while transcribing manually will show up, or we expect will show up in the automated transcriptions that the model generates. So we have to have a consistent set of rules. And what we decide to mark and not mark will also show up. So we will mark all superscripts, subscripts, underlines, strike-throughs, anything like that we want reflected in the transcript. So we have to mark those. Occasionally, we'll come across a convention that Transcribus has no native option for, but we still kind of want to capture. A really good example is fractions, common in checks. So we have no native fraction symbol. So we have to mark it as a superscript, followed by a /, followed by a subscript number. And that will, we find that kind of captures the fraction thing good enough. We have to be careful. Spelling mistakes have to be kept. These are all character by character. So, it's not doing the whole word. We want, a lot of times they're spelling words. I keep seeing brot spelled B-R-O-T, but we have to keep those. Occasionally, though, sometimes words will appear mostly correct. There might be a character that's wrong, but it's kind of hard to read and it could be correct. At that point, we'll use our best guess because it uses the context of the letters around it. Occasionally, with one character that's part of a common word, it'll just be like, that's supposed to be a G. We'll just put it there. If we're a word that is simply just not legible, we don't transcribe it because we don't want to give it bad data, teach it gibberish. When we train it, after we're done transcribing, we separate it into two sets, the training and the test. Our test data set's about 10% of the training set. And it must not be part of the training set. That's a basic machine learning thing. Transcribus doesn't even allow it. This makes sure that the model is able to generalize and is not simply able to just not memorizing the training set. All right, so let's look at some results. These graphs, we have the learning rate over time with the red line is the test set, the blue line is a train set. We're more interested in the test set accuracy. So on our entire, and this CER stands for character error rate, the lower the more accurate. So we did it on our entire digitized collection so far on just Dr. Charles Spivak, the secretary at JCRS. Dr. Charles Spivak, we noticed that he had so many checks written that we thought that alone was an interesting data set to try it on. And Jenny, which was Charles's wife, and she often corresponded with him about things that were going on in the sanatorium. So we noticed that the Dr. Spivak documents had the highest character error rate. That is not surprising. He has, especially when writing medical notes, very hard to read handwriting, very hastily scrawled. And also there's not a huge variety of words. There's a lot of, like I said, checks and appointment notes and whatnot. Now, the model that we trained on, only Dr. Spivak checks did actually better. I think in this case, the repetition almost made it easier for the model to memorize the checks. Unfortunately, that means it's too specific to be of much use. Now, the model trained on the entire collection, we were actually surprised. They got better accuracy than the small checks data set. It's more generalized. It was perfect. It was 15%. Now, that's pretty high for normal OCR, but for handwritten text, that's pretty good. And it does show the importance of maintaining a large and diverse data set. At first, we wanted to just try it on specific hands, and the longer that we've done this, the more we realize, no, a multitude, diversity of different hands makes it work better. Now, Jenny had the highest, or the lowest character rate, I'm sorry, and despite having the smallest data set, this is also not surprising. A lot of her are more personal letters. They're larger and they use more precise handwriting. They use a very large variety of words. She was very well spoken. And simple format. They're letters, so they're just line by line. We've had a couple interesting problems. Early on, we found out we had to diversify our test sets to make sure to do that. I accidentally had just shift-clicked a bunch of in a row, and what I had forgotten was that a lot of these documents are kept together. So this wasn't it was all checks, basically. And then when we trained it later, we got a higher, I said word count, I don't know why I did that, a higher character error rate, and then it looked like it got worse. And then we realized our mistake was that the previous test set was not indicative of the results as a whole. And send back to Jeff.
All right, so we developed this API for the Collections of Data project that will provide direct access to metadata and transcript data for the objects in our repository. This was built with a Node.js. It's a Node.js application. And also we're developing it in Swagger, so it will be Open API compliant. These endpoints are constructed with the collection ID or an item ID, which is a digital object ID. And they return a JSON object with, I should say a JSON string with the data you're requesting. A GET request to the collections route will just return a list of the collections in the repository, and each list item will contain the collections ID and title. And appending that collection ID to the collections route there will return just the metadata for the collection. I think I have an example of this next one. If you add the items endpoint there, you get a list of all the items within the collection. And again, this will show the items the items ID, the title, object type, because we actually nest some collections within other collections, so we just have to, identify if that's an actual object or another collection. And of course, we include the MIME title. And then appending that items ID onto the items endpoint, and we'll return metadata for that item. Oops, it's not gonna scroll down anymore, but yeah, so essentially that's, any metadata that we'd like to return will be included here. We also have a resource ID, or I'm sorry, a resource URL that you can't see on this example that will just give you the direct access to the digital object. APIs like this, of course, are very useful for automated data retrieval using a script of some sort. And this is a Python script that we've created just kind of to test the API out. And what this will do is it will iterate over a list of collections. And for each collection, it will download the metadata, any transcript data, a resource file for a specified number of objects in that collection. You can just go through and pull out data from the objects. You can pull it out of every object in the collection or just a certain amount. Our input file for this particular script will download 3 or so items from each collection just to test it out. You can go through and pull everything out if you ever have to. And I know it's a little complex and it's hard to see what's going on in there, but it's pretty straightforward. You're getting a list of, you have your first collection, you're getting a list of all the items in that collection and iterating over these IDs that you get back here. And for each item, you're constructing your different endpoints to get metadata, the resource file, and then a transcript. The transcript data will be available for any item that we have included it with, so it'll just automatically be there. This is an example of the output of the script. For each collection, we'll create a zip file with all these separate files here, metadata, a resource file, and a transcript for this particular item that had a transcript attached to it. So we have a transcript there. So it's nice and convenient, it creates these zip files that you can store or use later or whatever. This appears to be an example of, this slide was added kind of. Well, we ingest our items, our objects, I should say, and then we will generate a transcript for the object. And if a transcript has been generated using our OCR technology or other means, we will actually index that transcript data directly with the item's metadata. So it's easily accessible from our repository system, our discovery layer application. Speaking of that, this is a screenshot of our discovery layer application, and it shows how we are just simply appending the transcript text to a simple viewer under the main object viewer. And anytime, again, that an item has a transcript attached to it, it will automatically show up there. In the future, we're going to have functionality such as searching the text of the transcript and things like that. And we are using, just FYI, we're using Universal Viewer as our viewer choice here, which is. You can already search through the global search. You can do the global search, right, on the web page. Yeah, obviously. So, let's see. And that's it for me.
Okay. So really quickly talking about next steps here. So with these different pieces that we have in place now, we have like the privacy structure, ethics and privacy structure, we have the API, we have a process to produce our transcripts. Hold on a second. We have a few other directions we want to go as we continue to work on this project. So with everything starting to come together, we're starting to shift our thinking on how to create and roll out the services now that we have these structures for collections as data. So this means creating training and documentation resources, people that want to reuse our collections, and for record keeping and for working through some of our processes. We want to share that kind of information if people want to adopt and have a similar program. So we do have a blog as well. I think the link is at the end of the slides to talk about that process. And we're hoping to create more documents and communicate our practices, especially in terms of working on developing comprehensive documentation on how to use our API. And we're going to put all of that stuff on GitHub. Already the code to develop the API and is already there, but we're going to keep working on making that documentation more robust. We've seen, and I don't know if anyone, other people might have seen examples of like coming across a really cool API online, but oftentimes it's poorly documented or the documentation is out of date and doesn't actually apply like when you try and make requests or work with it. So we're committed to making sure that the documentation is usable and to keep it regularly updated. And we have tools like Swagger to help us kind of automate the documentation generation process, which is going to be very useful as we continue to iterate on how to structure or architect the design of the API. Also, when we start to get users or collections as data, we're going to release the terms of use and have that piece be integrated into the special collections and archives consultation workflow and figure out a way to embed it into our repository, maybe as a website or as a form that they can fill out that's embedded when they try and access our API or download data. And we've also had our ethics advisory board has agreed to be retained on a per request basis. So if we ever have these forms that are filled out and that they might have special use requests that we might need consultation for them, they will help us review the terms and come to a decision on how to give them access. Oops. So we're far from being done working with Transcribus. Already the results that we have with the trained models that we've developed, we can already start applying them. They already will save us like 5 to 10 minutes per document because it's pretty accurate, the data that they produce, and we would just require a bit of QA and editing work. But we hope to continue to improve those existing models in our collections and try to explore applying handwritten text recognition to other ones. So in the future, we're going to prioritize collections that researchers and students want to use with concrete use cases for working with that transcript data. But with the better success that we have with Jenny Spivak's collection, it's motivation for us to also try and look at more structured collections just to get a lot of these transcripts produced relatively quickly. And we also want to look at more features offered with handwritten text recognition and the Transcribus software. So Reed is continuing to work on additional features such as training models based on tags and annotations that are input by the user. So that's another avenue for us to explore. The Transcribus community is very active and it's still growing. So it's something that it's a place that we hope to participate more in the conversation more in the future. So there's an annual user conference that some of us are actually attending next week. And that provides many sessions for researchers to convene and kind of share the results. Okay, and I'm gonna go really quickly here. So we're having our production API available in the next few months, but we also want to implement authentication just to manage requests and monitor our technical resources. And a lot of the future enhancements will be dictated by users of the data. So we plan on instituting methods for collecting their feedback. So that's it. Please get in touch if you have more questions, or if you want to talk about doing some more work. Thank you. Any questions? Yep.
Was your goal to transcribe all of the digitized items in the collection, or did you prioritize which ones were going to be transcribed, and if so, how?
So we already had an existing collection of records that were already digitized. So we wanted to work on that one first. But I think, so it was kind of a small set of materials that we already had. And we found out actually throughout the course of the project that these were digitized maybe like 10 years ago or more. that the resolution was pretty poor, and we like consulted with the transcribers team to kind of see how we can improve the transcription results that we were getting. And so it turned out that we had to actually redigitize a bunch of stuff. So at that point, we were more selective about what we were choosing. We wanted to focus on, because we thought it would the results would be more effective if we had focused on like certain hands, so individuals with the same handwriting. So choosing Dr. Charles Spivak's writings or stuff that he wrote first, and then trying to work from there, see what the results were like. And then we were like a little not as impressed with the results. Like it was taking a really long time. We had like months where it was kind of tapering off the character error rate. So then Alice decided to like pivot and try another set of documents, and we saw that it was really effective. So we were just trying to like throughout the process, trying to figure out and it helped us guide like what documents to choose based on how effective the results were. I think we're out of time anyways. Okay.
One quick question, is the site, is the work you did in terms of analyzing the ethical implications of this and information about your advisory board, is that on your site? Do you say anything about that there?
Not yet. That's when we have the repository and we're actually providing the data. We'll put it on there, but we have a blog that's kind of tracking our progress, and we have the draft of that on the blog. Yeah, it's on there. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's on. Yeah, it's on that site.
That's
Yeah. That's what I meant.
Right, it's on the state.
Thank you.
Right, yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm gonna go out.
So you have a dongle?
No. Maybe Dominique, do you have a dongle for the, that we can borrow?
I was gonna say, it depends on if you have a newer Mac. This has a lightning bolt.
Is that the right? No.
Is that an Air?
Yeah.
Then no.
Yeah.
I think those need a USB.
Yeah.
I think do you have a new Mac? Yes.
Oh,
And I have to
yeah.
take
Yeah, you have it up?
Yeah. If you have a lightning port, I would.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you present? I guess you can see the arrow.
Is this okay? Okay, cool.
And bring your laptop. You can bring it back.
There's a lot of interest. Okay. This is new.
So we're good. Okay. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank Thomas and the Collections Data Group. Watching all y'all's presentations has been amazing because we've been focusing on the story of the collection a lot more than the data, but seeing all the kinds of amazing, cool things you all are doing, like gives me hope that those kinds of processes can really enhance our work going forward. It's just nice to have a grant that has a cohort and a community behind it. So we're going to be presenting today about the Native American Educational Services College Digital Library Project. We'll be saying NACE for Native American Educational Services College. First, I just want to introduce our team. I'm Josh Hahn. I'm the English and Digital Humanities Librarian at Northwestern University.
My name is Melanie Cloud. I'm Director of Educational Development at both NACE and American Indian Association of Illinois.
Hello, my name is Allison. I'm the Graduate Research Assistant, and should I talk about the things that I'm sure? Yeah. And so the roles that I've been doing I've been helping digitize the library collection as well as build a interactive timeline by working with Doreen Weiss, who is the Director of American Indian Association and who is also the last president of NACE, and also by using a previous historian book who had gone through the archives named John Lakaitis, and it was called Community and Self-Determination. And what we've been doing is using that with Doreen's knowledge and oral histories to try and map it out in a straight order. And I've also taken a particular interest in the field projects recently, which is really unique to the college, and reading through them and writing abstracts, and then also, yeah, of course.
Yeah, just so we can see.
And then also we're just looking at the syllabi and the different classes that had been there, and presenting what's the uniqueness of the coursework at this college. Yes.
So the other team members are Doreen Measy, who is was the president of NACE College and is the president of the American Indian Association of Illinois. We'll talk a little bit more about this collaboration between Northwestern and AIAI, or American Indian Association of Illinois, in a minute. And then Kelly Weiskup at Northwestern, who is an English scholar and who really laid a lot of the groundwork for this collaboration. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. And then John Dorr, my boss, who is helping with some more logistics or larger scale vision things at the library as we go forward. So Native American Educational Services College, or NACE College, was begun in Chicago in 1974, and this was the first urban American Indian college in the United States. So we had a history of tribal colleges, but never an urban Indian college. It was extremely unique, remains unique to this day in a lot of ways. And after, even before it closed in 2005, I had expanded to satellite campuses and reservations across the country. So in Montana, Wisconsin, and New Mexico, also another urban population in Minneapolis. So it really had a really broad impact across the nation. And it really served students of hundreds of different tribal affiliations, ages, and backgrounds, especially in Chicago, which has a representation of over 100 tribal affiliations in the state of Illinois alone. So while it no longer offers accredited courses, it's still here, and that was really a big part of our project, is to say we want to make sure that the story is told. So NACE concluded in 2005. There was some, I guess, drama in how it closed. And if you Google NACE right now, you'll probably find the Chicago Tribune story talking about how it closed. But you're not going to find the story of the hundreds of students that went there, went on to do what they did, the kinds of new forms of pedagogy that they were promoting at NACE. And so we really wanted to center the story of our data and the story of this collection, in hopes both to tell those stories that people have of NACE, but also in a decolonial move to make sure if we can present the story and keep story alive, then our data can be used in many different ways outside of how we originally intended. But we kind of have that core story, that core context always with us. So. And we're gonna intersperse this with some pictures. So this is Robert Dumont Jr. He was a professor at NACE early on, and this is at the Fort Peck site in Montana. You can see that NACE College was also housed with the tribal archives there at Fort Peck. And then on the right, we have a board meeting in 1982 at NACE College in Chicago. And these are some of the items from the collection as well. I'll tell more about the collection. So NACE, again, was open from 74 to 2005. Around 300 graduates, but many more who went to NACE. And the students were made up of, and this was a bachelor's degree program. This was a 4-year bachelor's degree program. The students were made up of anywhere from the ages of 26 to the 60s, I think they had students. And it was Native faculty, it was Native administration, and it were Native students. And it was a community-based education, which means that all of the students one of the reasons why the student population was older is that all of the students were already working in the community at different organizations. And NACE was trying to bring a tribal knowledge base and an academic knowledge base and bring those together to create new credential leadership for the future of Native communities across the country. So the goal was, as they learned, they would go back to their communities and impart that knowledge and use it. Also, one of the really powerful things about NACE is that students got credit at the college when they came in for the things they had done in their life already. So the things they knew, the things they had experienced, the places they had worked, that was considered actual credit at the university, which if anyone here has ever transferred, you know it is not really like a thing. And so it was really focused on student direction. The classes were taught in the round. Students were encouraged to bring their knowledges out, not just have the kind of sage on the stage model of education. Indigenous languages were taught. Student field projects that Allison mentioned were a staple of the curriculum. So every student at their final thesis, if you will, senior thesis, was a field project, which meant they were working in the community, coming up with either some sort of like pitch. For one student talked about, you know, building a nursery back on the reservation. One student did a whole field project on helping their tribe get federal recognition. So they're very much based in the grounded knowledge and place. NACE also had a library, it had a bookstore, it had an archives, it had a press, so it published original publications, and also an annual powwow, which for many years was apparently the best powwow in town. So it was only outdoor powwow too, right? Yeah. So, and here's an example. Thanks to the Wayback Machine, we still have access to a lot of the early NACE college websites. So we've been using that as to find a lot of names and dates and different things like that. So here's an example of a couple of the early websites. But our project is a collaboration between NACE, the American Indian Association of Illinois, Northwestern University Libraries, and also Northwestern's more recent Center for Native American Indigenous Research, of which Kelly, who I mentioned before, and I are both a part of. We're considering this an institution-led and community engaged. I don't want to say community-based necessarily, because this is housed at Northwestern in a lot of ways. But the project explores the NACE College Library and Archives, and it shares the stories of those who used and shaped the collection and the story itself, and really tries to center experiences and creations that continue to emanate from this important and impactful urban American Indian institution. So we really want to talk about not just the past and not just the present of the collection, but how can we enable new futures for this stuff, and how can we enable new futures for these stories? This is a picture of actually Doreen was right here when she was working. I don't know what she was working on in there, but this is actually the NACE College Library, and that, as Allison mentioned, one of the first things we did was we digitized the card catalog that we have. And a really quick, funny, light story is that this is how far we've come in our collaboration. Is that so? Kelly and I, two academics, have this massive card catalog that AIAI gave us, and we're preparing it for digitization. Just kind of understand what was in this collection, you know. And they were all bound by these rubber bands, and they had stickies on them that said 200, 300, 500. And so we're like sorting them by the numbers, and we're thinking about like what's the classification system that they organize these by. And we're doing this for like an hour or two, and we're getting nowhere. It doesn't make any sense how these are organized. And then we finally Facebooked Doreen on Facebook Messenger and was like, what do these numbers mean? She goes, oh, that's just how many are in each bundle. So, and we were like, so we felt pretty bad about ourselves for a little bit, but then it was very easy to arrange going forward. So yeah, we've digitized the card catalog, and that was our way of getting a sense of what the collection looked like in the 80s. And then Allison diligently went through and hand transcribed those what we digitized. And the card catalog was what we started with and what we applied for this grant about, thinking about collections as data. But it really became the story of the collection. So like we have this moment in time, which was what the catalog represents. Probably sometime in the late 80s is when they stopped doing cards, potentially, it seems like, because a lot of them are dated. But what we started to realize through talking to Doreen, talking to former librarians at NACE, to Mel and other folks, is that this collection went through so many iterations. There was, when NACE first started, just to be accredited, they had to have a certain amount of volumes in the collection. So they just took donations of anything. Then as they matured, they hired librarians who did collection development. In the 70s and 80s, you see more native authored texts, so they could actually do collection development a lot more robustly. There was a fire at NACE in the 90s. No, there was a fire at some point which decimated some of the collection. And then when the college shut down, Doreen weeded based on certain kinds of, she wanted to really focus on keeping the native authored or native centered text. So this data set is a moment in time, but it doesn't really tell the story. And so the story is what we focused on a lot. And we also realized that when Doreen first approached us about Northwestern possibly acquiring the library collection, we just thought, okay, it's a library collection of monographs. What we found out is that it's a massive archive. It's the 30-year history of this college. There's documentation on student records. There's original publications from NACE Press. There's course guides and syllabi and all sorts of things. So it's a much larger scale and scope than we originally anticipated. The whole collection right now is in a storage unit just outside of Chicago, I think, right? And we've been going there and trying to do archival research in a storage unit, which is really interesting. Some of the collections at University of Chicago, it's another long story. AIAI has some in their offices. University of New Mexico has the LaDonna Harris papers that were originally housed at NACE College. And then there's just stuff community members have. For instance, Nora Lloyd, her field project was a handmade book. That's how she presented it. She has that copy. University of Chicago doesn't have it. We don't have it. So that's still with her. Yeah, meeting notes, emails, original art from the offices, just all kinds of stuff. This is a picture of one of the objects in the archive. This is a 1982 commencement brochure or pamphlet, and this is like one way we get some of our data too. We can see names of people who graduated years and those sorts of things. So Mel's been really diligently collecting all that kind of stuff. And then here's the NACE's first graduate, Willard Lemire, with Paul Gibson, is on I think the first proclamation of American Indian Day in Illinois. So some of our deliverables are going to be data. We have the spreadsheet of the library collection. We're getting a biographical database. One of the things we really want to do is have a list of all the organizations that were part of NACE or came from NACE so that we can kind of create social network graphs and things like that. A lot of the work that you all are doing is really inspiring our ideas here. My favorite part of it, because I'm a librarian and a total nerd, is that the NACE created a classification system that was native-centered. And it's this really amazing document. I don't know how many people know about the Brian Deere classification system, but in the 70s, Brian Deere in Canada created an indigenous kind of alternative, one could say, to the Library of Congress. And there were in the 70s, there were more and more people kind of using that locally. But NACE librarians came up with their own way of organizing knowledge for the college based on indigenous ways of knowing and also the needs of the college. So it's a really robust classification system. And we have found various different iterations of it too. So we have handwritten versions of it where they're like negotiating different topics and things. So it's a really cool system. We're going to create a website pretty much to make, like, what if NACE College exists right now? What would the website look like, kind of thing? Like, we really want to like show its presence. And so how can we have an alumni page with peoples and bios? In 1983, NACE published this really amazing document about their mission and philosophy. That is just, I think, a pedagogically important document to be out in the world. So publish that as their mission statement. We're going to do a white paper, which will talk more about the issues of like what Northwestern can do to scale to support these kinds of activities. We've also been doing community events and engagements, and we're going to have a concluding one at the end of April as well. And then new futures, just the story being out there and being talked about more, I think is a really important deliverable. And after our first community event, we kind of realized, like, we almost felt like we were done with the project. We're like, everyone's happy, you know, like everyone enjoyed themselves and was talking about it. We had an exhibit, we had people sharing their stories, and we're like, that can be a deliverable. It doesn't always have to be a thing, a tangible thing or whatever. Does that mean I'm out of time? And here's some pictures from our first event, which we housed in the at the AIAI in the church that they're part of. Here's part of the exhibit that Mel set up and Allison, and some people speaking. We had everyone go around the room and just talk about what did NACE mean to you, and it was really powerful and interesting. And then a lot of people taking pictures of each other. So our process really quickly, because I think I might be running out of time, is relationship building was a big part of our process. So like I said before, Kelly, the American Indian Association, one of the big things they do is they have a program called Native Scholars, which is an after-school program for Native youth in the city. And Kelly was a tutor there, right? And that was kind of began her relationship with Doreen and Mel. Kelly also works extensively with the American Indian Center in Chicago and has a lot of connections there. And so that groundwork was a big part in why we did get to work kind of sooner than we did. But even then, like Mel didn't know me, Mel didn't know Allison, I didn't know Doreen. So our first several meetings, I came with this agenda. I'm like, I'm used to libraries, I don't have an agenda. We just told stories. Like we just talked about our lives and the things we've been through. And we spent a lot of time doing that. So a lot of our team meetings are also team meals, just trying to like hang out and try to do work in the same time, which sometimes we don't do much work. Sometimes we do, it happens. Our archival research outings, going to the University of Chicago, going to the storage space, hoping that there's not too much fumes in the storage space. Like one time we were in the storage space and it was just the cars that drive through it, and then it closes and it was very fumey and we just had to like leave. We're just like, we can't work here that long. So how can you work with a collection that's packed into a storage space and you can only move it out and back so many times? We have a Facebook page that Doreen started and we all talk a lot on a group chat through Messenger. Contacts with the community. So Mel's been really great with outreaching to the community. A lot of the folks, in the library, I can email my colleagues and just say, hey, will you come here at this amount of time, this part of time? Like especially for elders in the community, right? Like you need to see them, you need to be in space with them. And Mel's been instrumental in like making those contacts and connections and speaking at different events with folks. So that's been huge. And yeah, just the events and conversations and stories we've been sharing. Here's a picture on the left, or this picture right here is Doreen and Mel at University of Chicago. We can talk about that trip another time too. And this is us all at AIAI in their office. And these are many of the Native scholars. I'll pose them for a picture as if they were doing research. We have not put them together to work, or put them to work too much. They've helped out moving the collection and stuff a lot, but we haven't had them doing research yet, but it was a fun picture. I think one of them intentionally read something upside down. Some challenges that we've had: collaboration across institutions, right? Northwestern is a fairly big school. We have an insane bureaucracy that drives me mad most days. And then AIA is a much smaller organization, right? It's really Doreen and Mel and a group of volunteers, right? And so that's been really hard to like learn. We'll learn the languages and be able to translate between these two different kinds of organizations. Access to the collection has been great in the sense that we do have access to the collection, but also limited in the sense that it's in a storage unit and we haven't been able to like put it out and do everything. And one big drawback for Northwestern is one of the reasons why it's a little bit harder for me to collaborate with the broader libraries. We don't own the collection or house the collection. And that's one thing I'm hoping to kind of put in the white paper about how we can think of ourselves as better community partners and scale up for community support of collections and not just think of it along the ownership model of we need to have this in order to work on it, right? And so how can we be more responsive to those sorts of things, and how can we think of those as opportunities for collection building as well? Scope and focus has been hard because this collection is just massive. We can tell so many stories and go out and collect so much data from different things. So, and then community engagement. When we first started, we wanted to do a lot of oral histories. We're realizing that this is a much older community than we thought. So a lot of folks aren't around, also because of the study sites in Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and elsewhere that we just don't have quite the broad connections quite yet to do that kind of work. Here's the front page of one of the first parts of the classification system with handwriting, and that's NACE at the Menominee Reservation in Wisconsin. that house right there. Successes, our archival research trips have been great, and the things we get to like interact with in the storage space has been amazing. Knowledge and story sharing, the classification system has been a big thing that we're excited about. And then, like I said before, the community events and engagement have been great. This is a picture from the NACE powwow, and that's the NACE bookstore at the powwow. So if anyone's ever run a merch table before. In the future, we really want to focus on collection, storage, and stewardship. How can we sustain this collection? It's a very expensive thing for AIA to store. It's also, we need to really speed up the conversations with Northwestern about potentially acquiring this. One thing we're doing is we're creating a finding aid as best we can as not archivists to help other folks understand what's in this collection so that they might be able to acquire or take on steward in the future. We've been talking about alumni association, possibly presentations and publications at conferences and such things, potentially future data visualizations, thinking about all this data that we are collecting and not really doing computational work with, maybe doing that more in the future. Collaborations with tribal libraries. The Saginaw Chippewa tribe just got a grant to create a classification system for their collection, and I've been talking with their tribal librarian about NACE and their classification system and how we might be able to collaborate with them. And then new roles in Northwestern, like I said, about thinking about community archive outreach and participation. And that's all I got. So if anyone has questions for me, Allison, or Mel, or hopefully we have some time. Yeah.
Thank you.
What has been the role, if any, of the special collections or archival staff at the library in this project?
Yeah, not a ton. Preservation, we've been doing a lot of work with. A lot of it, the lack of answer has a lot of reasons to this that I'm not willing. I mean, I don't need to discuss over a live stream, but we've been reorganizing. There's just lots of reasons why this hasn't become a Northwestern collection. But it's really the next phase of our push the next few months and going forward is to bring that team in now that they're a little more organized after the reorganization to really have these kinds of discussions. But I do think it's a very unique collection, at least for Northwestern. And I think we've learned that we need to spend a lot more time learning how to talk about it so that other people understand it. And so that's been one of the big pieces of this collection is like this project is how can we better let people know? And we're finding out as we're learning how to describe it, right? So I think that's a big piece to why there hasn't been as much collaboration yet.
I'm curious from the association's perspective, what is actually the ideal arrangement? Is the ideal arrangement for the association to maintain custodianship and have a collaboration with Northwestern, or is the ideal to have Northwestern acquire it as part of their permanent collection?
At first, it was to have Northwestern acquire the collection as a whole, because we do have not only the books and the archives, but we do have an art collection, an extensive art collection that we are housing in storage right now. And but it seems as the year has gone by, we haven't really got any information as to what Northwestern really wants to do with it. So we're finishing up this year right now. And Doreen and I are in the process of looking at other grants to actually have a storefront if Northwestern doesn't collect it. So, but our goal in the beginning was to have Northwestern acquire the entire collection.
And that's still on the table. We're hoping to do that. One of our original dreams, as Doreen potentially originally wanted, was for this collection to both be stewarded by Northwestern and kept as a whole. So maybe almost like a distinctive collection within a collection. And the storefront idea is really great because we've been thinking about like how can we make this more accessible to the community. Like one thing, Northwestern is technically open to the public, but we don't really do a great job of like letting folks know that. And so how can we create, how can we lower the barriers of entry for community to come in? And I think our new collaboration with the Center for Native American Indigenous Research, they just got a house and they're going to have a very small room that's a library. So we have all these different options on the table. We just haven't really been able to hammer anything out quite yet. So it's been frustrating for sure for this project and for us, most definitely. Any other questions? Cool. Well,
Can I speak one?
Yeah.
Not so much a question as just what I have learned from this experience and what I think is so interesting. As I have grown up on the Leech Lake Indian Reservation, and so I always grew up with like urban and rural and like at least 95% Native Americans, and I'm enrolled in the Flanders Sante Sioux tribe. And so those two tribal affiliations are typically pretty large on political movements and maintaining cultural identity, and that's a lot of what the educational services and just education in general Chicago has been, is maintaining their cultural identity and maintaining enrollment and having that sense of community, which is so large. And you see that reflected in our project, like how we interact with each other and tell stories and like build community. And so I just wanted to share that as well as what I learned is a really great part of this project. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
It's like a welcome surprise.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, what do y'all use it? This one's easy. So you should do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, just works. That's easy.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Johnny. Well, you might need to pop in so we'll refer to you. I can point to.
Are we good to start? Okay. So this is Collections as Data at Pitt. Our project title is From Collection Records to Data Layers, a critical experiment in collaborative practice. So I'm Tiger Capital, the project lead and humanities data librarian at Pitt. Also speaking will be Justina Phillips, who is our teaching and learning coordinator, a new addition to the team officially. And she's the digital scholarship librarian and head of digital scholarships at digital scholarship services at Pitt. And Matt Lavin is our disciplinary scholar, the clinical assistant professor of English and director of the digital media lab in the English department at Pitt. And Aaron Brenner, who's our administrative librarian, could not make it, unfortunately, but he is the associate university librarian for digital scholarship and creation at the University Library System. We had a handful of very key partners. We worked with quite a few people, but I couldn't imagine this project going where it did without these people. There's Mike Bolam, who is the head of metadata and discovery unit at our library, Kristen Britannic, who was the digital collections coordinator for archives and special collections, whom we will greatly miss, and Willow Gillingham, who also was the system developer of information technology. We've also lost her. And then two instructors in the English department with whom we worked, and Justina will talk a little bit more about Dan and Amy Murray Twining's courses that we worked with. You can find out more about our project at our project website, catapit.github.io, and our GitHub repository. They should link to and from one another. We can only get so in depth in the 20 minutes that we have. So look forward to more content being added to these sites. Right now, it's a bit incomplete, very much work in progress. We do imagine that the GitHub repository will continue to be a work in progress as more data sets are added. So our project aims to develop effective strategies for accessing and enriching library collections data through research-driven and critically interpretive layers of additional data that are conducive to computational use. So there are a few goals that we have with that. The first goal is simply to make the library collections data accessible to users. So first, we wanted to create make available the source data, whether that be MARC or mods or whatever kind of metadata formats there are for particular items and collections. And this is because, for the most part, collections items are either not very or not at all accessible to users. They might not know and can't possibly get access to it without working through our library system, the people, interfacing with people. And then not only making available these different metadata files, we wanted to make it a little bit more readable and understandable to users. So instead of them seeing MARC with its very jargony and encoded format and hierarchical data models like XML, mods, EAD, we wanted to create spreadsheet tables that's the data model that users are most likely going to be able to understand. And we don't include all of the data they can find in all those data formats. We pulled out elements that we think would be generally most useful for a majority of scholars. And then we wanted to enable those scholars, once they have access to that data, to then describe that data, add enriching information to augment what the library has. This had already been happening for several years in our library system with various humanities scholars trying to describe collections items in order to figure out what is going to be useful for my research questions. So this is something that librarians want to know, what are going to be useful materials for different researchers, and researchers want to obviously know this as well. And we decided to take this this data layer mindset because it's important for us, we thought, to emphasize that these different data sets, these data metadata files are not monolithic, they're not complete, they're not perfect. So they're just iterations and attempts by people to describe these objects. We also wanted to collaborate with the scholars that we see as our target audience to teach computational-minded data stewardship practices. And as I said, Justina will talk about how we integrated our project in various courses. And then last but not very much not least, we wanted to increase the visibility of our library collection items, especially those that reflected diverse perspectives, those of marginalized and underrepresented groups. Our project is one of the only that is not collections first. So we don't have a specific collection that we centered this project around. So we ended up using collections and various items that our users tend to want to work with. So they include the voices of African Americans, American labor unionists, American left-wing organizations, the LGBT community, and feminists. And oftentimes you find those voices best represented in journals and magazines, newspapers, newsletters, and various ephemera, things that they created, they have control over. So for the rest of the time, we'll talk about the challenges and successes and deliverables. I'll be talking about data. We'll talk about the code. We'll be talking about instructional modules and a little bit about documentation. So one of the challenges was just the sheer number of metadata files and formats we were working with. I started this project 3 months after I graduated from my MLIS program. And so I did not focus on metadata. I did take one class, which was very, very helpful for me, but there was a lot of terms and jargon and structures and all these things to wrap my mind around. And Mike definitely came in handy for this. But then there are a lot of local terms that didn't have a lot of documentation. So I'm like, I don't know what this means, and had to talk to a lot of people who are part of the lore of ULS metadata creation, how these things came to be. And the data, is always worse than you expect, even though you expect it to be messy and dirty. But a lot of that came from other formats being converted to what we have now. So going from MARC to maybe MARC's XML to mods, wasn't a clean transition. And then there are inconsistencies due to changes in data entry practices and the different users over time, or different metadata creators over time. And we also found that the metadata was sparse, in that we thought, scholars will really want to know this information. But the library oftentimes just want to make these materials available digitally. So there's minimal metadata collected or created. So we have to cut our expectations back for this base layer. I mentioned a bit of the lack of documentation here and there, but we were able to get that metadata out with the help of our systems developer, who created a system that will interface with Islandora, which is our digital library repository system, exporting things which took ages to do, but I got it. And then Mike in the metadata discovery unit helped us to do our first trial at extracting these different, all the data from these formats and transforming them into tables using XSLT. So that was really great. I think I am turning it over. Yes. Oh, one more time. The last bit is the deliverable for data is going to be this data repository, which you can access now. Be warned, very much work in progress. But there are three main folders: the base layer, the source data, and extension layer. So those three data layers that I mentioned before. Usually they will be, they'll have subfolders that represents the collections that they're working with. However, the extension layers might cross collections, so it won't follow the same hierarchy necessarily. And then at minimum for the CSVs in the base layer, subfolders will have collections level description or metadata and item level.
So this is my bit. Just in terms of the challenges and successes of specifically working with code, I think some people have mentioned some of this before in this session, also maybe at the last one of these. But one thing that I think was surprising was just how hard it is to carve out the time to sit down and code. No one on our particular project was the designated coder. I am someone who knows Python. I'm not trained as a software engineer, and I'm a professor in the English department. So I, as the primary coder, just like finding time to work on it. Aaron Brenner did a lot of the coding as well. We had a graduate student over the summer who helped. Tyrika did some things. But just getting everybody together and talking about things was a big challenge for sure. And we had kind of working code, proof of concept code pretty quickly, but doing something that was sustainable. And then another big challenge that Tyrika already mentioned was we're dealing with different formats, such as MARC and mods, but also just the data entry practices within EAD files differed from collection to collection. And as people know, this is one of the great strengths of an XML standard, is that it's just incredibly adaptable and you can do different things. It's also, makes it much harder to write code that works on kind of, any MARC XML or any mods file. And the deliverables that are coming out of this is, number one, we really wanted to be able to move from these hierarchical structures to these flat file structures, specifically CSV. Wanted what we shared out to work with existing workflows that would be more common in like an intro to data analytics type context, right? We wanted to be able to say, these are the fields that are either the most reliable, the most usable, that would actually be of interest to people doing analytics, as opposed to they have some library internal meaning, but maybe not much meaning to outside collaborators. We want to be able to read, our output will be able to read multiple schema. A lot of scripts that people are talking about that they produced for this are similar in that, it's something that you can pull up on the command line, give this program like command line flags, run it in Python, and it'll do just everything for you. It'll create the folders for you. It will make sure those folders don't already exist before making them so that it doesn't erase existing data. And then when you're done, you'll have a CSV for the collection level data taken from something like an EAD. And then it'll have item level data in a CSV that is pulled from the item level, either XML or data source that's used for internal library use. And then I would say, like, for the deliverable, kind of the last thing related to this is, and I'd say this is largely absent so far, but it's kind of the next big thing, is just like lots and lots of documentation that explains both like the choices we made and how to adapt the script for your uses, because we do anticipate an audience that's going to have different data entry practices or different cataloging practices. So obviously just lots of transparency and lots of documentation of how we did what we did. Yeah. Suzanne?
Great. Hello again. My name is Justina Phillips. I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian and the Teaching and Learning Coordinator recently added to this project. So just talking about instruction, this data is designed for people to interact with, and some of our audiences that we'd like to interact with this include students of various levels and instructors who are teaching those students. We'd also like to gather sort of feedback as we go along. We had a challenge early on in that the course that we intended to demo this in was unfortunately canceled. So we've had to rely on volunteer instructors to allow us into their classrooms to run some individual modules. These have been 2 cases last semester and 1 case this semester, being 2 session visits, so 2 50 or 75-minute courses in which we teach sort of a specific subset of skills. So this requires some introduction. A challenge is that we have to introduce the students first to the concept of collections data. Why does a library collect data? How does a library collect data? And what does that look like? And then to the actual instructional content about working with that data. So that's both a challenge and an opportunity, I think. So the modules are designed to elicit specific skills and concepts, which I'll show on the next slide. But thank you to our 2 instructors who did volunteer, Amy Murray Twining, who's actually volunteered for us twice, and Dan Lieberts. So again, some challenges with these sessions are we have 2 of them. So we have 1 chance to give feedback in that second session, but no chance after that beyond what we're doing in the class. So we have some ability to run assessment and sort of course correct with students, but not a ton. The students did seem really engaged. They gave really thoughtful responses and had some really great ideas for us. They were really interested, for example, in image analysis, which we did not expect when we showed them the collections, but gave us some interesting feedback about how people might choose to use this collections data or enhance this collections data for their own purposes. Yeah. So the things that we're going to do next is we're going to try to release these modules. There are 5 of them over on the side there that you can read. I can talk more about them on question and answer if you'd like. We want to make these generalizable to work with different library collections data, to work with various of our collections, if we extend this, for example, for instructors to be able to work with or without help from us. And we need them to be easy and clear so that they can be implemented in different kinds of courses. So this is a challenge that I'm going to be tackling over the next couple of months. Also the motivation and payoff. So why would you work with collections data? What does that add to your class? What does that add to your research inquiry areas? And how does this help you do that? Those need to be articulated when we release these modules and in the modules themselves. And a challenge for us has been integrating critique into these modules. So when you work with data, you want to have sort of this process of self-critique, right? What am I collecting? Why am I collecting it? Are these data structures reifying something I don't want them to reify, for example? So going over that with the students and integrating critique into the modules. You might notice critique is its own module, has been a recent discussion, and I think it's really exciting, but it's also challenging. So again, the deliverables, things that we've completed, we have done those 2 course integrations, one of which we will turn into an extension layer. So students added genre terms from the art and architecture thesaurus to our collections data. There were also term frequencies generated for a specific class that will be added. These are or will be on the GitHub. Upcoming, we're doing a datathon to test the implementer layer module. Special thanks to the graduate student assistant in DSS, Evelyn Chan, who's helping us with that. We're going to be creating an extension layer with geographical data and hopefully descriptive tags generated by the participants. We're going to do the second course integration, and we will have students working with Nat in first experiences in research that I'm excited to learn more about myself.
So the last, but one of the most important deliverables is documentation. And that we want to describe the rationale behind our project, why we chose to go with the data layers mindset that we did, which I spoke to a little bit already. And then also requirements, the things you're going to need, the people you're going to need, the skills and expertise that they're going to offer, the labor. And then the tech that we used, both heavyweight and lightweight versions. We might say that ours is a heavyweight version, even though it's all open source. But we will be thinking more about what different versions of this might look like in other iterations of this kind of work. We also include some documentation for how to navigate the repository and how one might contribute to the repository. Data dictionary to make sense of the various elements that are going to be weaved throughout the data sets, and workflow models. Both the internal, so going from whatever that data file is until it gets to the repository, and those two data layers. And then for the user, once they access those first two data layers, how they can go about creating their additional data layers, their additional data sets. In our post-grant plans, to implement those workflows that we're going to be hashing out, and then a paper or an article to talk through this process a lot more in detail. And then some future project ideas that we have would be to create a database outside of GitHub, perhaps that will enable browsing and depositing data sets, as well as maybe some automated visualizations of the data there, at least for the library created ones. And then maybe a graphic user interface for creating data sets that's a little bit more manageable for people who don't have a lot of familiarity with Python. And then we really do want to be able to integrate the data sets that scholars create with the library collection records. We would love recommendations for a lot of these things and opportunities for collaboration. So if you are doing anything related to this kind of work, let's work together. So yeah, questions.
Are there like slides or anything publicly available where we might be able to see the components of the instructional sessions that have been conducted already?
Let's see. We don't have any publicly available slides, I don't think, from the instruction sessions, although I'm sure we'd be happy to share them with you. The modules themselves, when they're published, will be lesson plans. I don't know if we've made any decisions about including slides, but we have made decisions about including like worksheets and things that we've used, that all with lots of open licensing so that they can be changed at will. But yeah, that's an interesting question about slide decks. I hadn't thought to add those to the modules as published. I don't know if Tyler has.
I have thought about it, and we do CC them. So yeah, we would definitely put them up. We just haven't gotten around to putting all the instructional stuff up. Figured they'd go up at the same time, but yeah.
So I'm very curious about, how the environment is presenting this information to students as opposed to a group of people who are all thinking about it in a different way.
Yeah, with what we're intending to do with the modules isn't suggest these are readings that we had students go through. This is a slide deck that we put together so they know what collections records are and the history of that. Something really great that Erin put together. I'm very excited to share that. It was so informative for me. But then also this is what we did. This is how we approached this class session via our slides and our itinerary, as we call it.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you had to kind of, I assume you had to sort of scope down what you were going to teach when you moved from the semester long to the workshops.
Yeah, and if you have anything to add, but how we had to scope down going from having a 16-week course to a couple of 2-week sessions or 2 sessions in classes. Well, I don't know if Matt did, he was going to be teaching the class, but I don't know exactly what we were scoping down from. What we were thinking we were going to be able to do in detail beyond what we proposed in our project proposal. But it was definitely very difficult. For example, that information we wanted to present about how we got from card catalog to MARC to mods, we had to have that be a reading that an optional reading, and just gesture towards that without going into detail about those kinds of things. So it was a little overambitious, all the things that we wanted to teach even still with that in mind. But yeah, so we didn't have like, oh, we have all of this material and now we're gonna squish it down to that. It was like, what are the minimal amounts of information that they need to know for these things to make sense? Yeah.
And just to interject really briefly, the modules will be drafted from a perspective of someone who joined the project after the class had been canceled. So I'm scaling down in some ways because there were pre-existing ideas about how we would teach this, but yep, that's my experience.
I mean, just in terms of the class that I was going to teach, I think what we didn't have that obviously it would have been nice to have is the way my syllabus was made was like you go to special collections one day every week and just look at materials and work with materials. And like a lot of the class wasn't about data layers at all. It was just about like what type of information is in these materials and like what are the genres of archival documents that are the most likely to kind of come up when you do research on people you're interested or events that you're interested in. So, you know, like what does it mean to look at someone's diary 100 years later, or what does it mean to read correspondence and think about who it's addressed to and how the content changes based on the addressee? And, you know, Pitt has as many libraries do, a nice interface for looking at digitally scanned documents. What does it mean to move from a kind of physical object that you can look at to a proxy? And something is lost, right? I think we all believe that. So, and then other things could, at least in theory, be gained through analytic or visualization methods. So I think the main thing that was really challenging for all of us is how do we turn this into a module that can be done in 2 days where the students just don't have all of that coming in. So that could mean they don't necessarily understand why this is important to us. It could mean that they don't ever get to see those materials physically. There's just a lot of that we had to kind of build in. And yet there was still, I think, tremendous value in getting those perspectives as well. And now lunch.
Yeah, that's what we
So we are going to go back to that original room for lunch, and I'd like to strongly encourage you all to sit, not with the people that you presented with, but mix it up and use this time just to ask those questions, make everybody get a chance to.
Are we okay to leave our stuff in?
The room will be
Okay, I couldn't tell, I didn't know when you started.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I kept kind of like.
It's also kind of nice to have a quiet time on the computer. But honestly, I was working the whole day on the computer. Get things organized. I love this so much.
Yeah.
know, right?
I was like, I genuinely dislike, I was like,
It's basically my normal.
I have a lot of feelings.
Before I. The last project. I want to go through the modules and learn myself. Like,
Yeah, I was
because like I know of all these things tangentially, but I don't understand the difference between them. I don't understand create that.
No. I mean, that was a healthy choice.
She's been part-time and like, she's never been. Which I was surprised. And I almost did that last night, we can kind of try, which is the one that's the best rate and it's most of whatever it was.